Hey everybody, my name is Dave Jackson, and this is Tales from the Backlog, a video games podcast where I bring in guests to talk about the games we play. My guest today is a friend of the show and a Cursed Idol enthusiast, Suvesh, aka Mysticreferee.
Hey Dave, thank you so much for inviting me onto this podcast. This is not something I usually do, but it just so happened that I was hanging out in the Duff Feed Slack that evening and just put out the question about Kingsfield 4, and I just love the game so much that I jumped at the chance to talk about it with someone. So thank you again for inviting me.
Hell yeah. Glad to have you come on the show. And like you said, today's game that we're talking about is Kingsfield 4, also known as Kingsfield the Ancient City. I think that's the North American title of the game, which is a first-person action RPG developed by FromSoftware and published in North America by Agitech in 2001. Elevator pitch for Kingsfield 4, for people who may not be familiar with it, this is first-person FromSoftware before they started making Souls games. So it's kind of a look back into the history of FromSoftware.
Yeah, and that's right. The nomenclature of Kingsfield can be confusing to a lot of people. It was 1, 2, 3, and 4 in Japan. 1 just never got released here, so 2, 3, and 4 just were 1, 2, an ancient city. And that elevator pitch really kind of summarizes it. But as from personal experience and having spoken before to people that have, had experience with like the older age of like FromSoftware or like have revisited these older games, there's a lot more to them, so yeah.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get into that extra stuff. Like this isn't a first-person Souls game, this is its own thing, and we'll draw comparisons where they're due, but this is its own thing in a lot of ways too. So, but before we get into Kingsfield, what else have we been playing lately? So we'll start with you, Mystic. What have you been playing?
All right. So before the holidays, I finally started playing Death Stranding.
Yeah. Okay.
So the funny thing about Death Stranding is that you just couldn't escape it, right? When it first came out, obviously. Right. And, there's just so much, it was just an event, I think, when it came out. Like, most people like wondering what that game is. So even though I didn't play the game, because like I wasn't sure if that was going to be something for me. I did check out like a bunch of LPs when it came out, and then my wife played through it. So I pretty much knew the entire story of the game, having watched LPs and having played, watch people play the game, and having watched it at home as well. I'm gonna say like the Kojima-ness of it is a little bit too much for me at times.
It's a lot. Yeah,
it's a lot. But man, oh man, like when it hits its highest in like its quietest moments, I think. And it's just been in my head for a long time, and I definitely wanted to play it at some point in the future. And the director's cut was a great excuse to get back into it. And yeah, like even though I've pretty much know the plot of the game, seen most of it, like when it's a hiking simulator, in its quietest moments, it's pretty transcendent. I think it's a game that will age really well. As much as it pains me to say it, like there isn't much like it. There's not much like it. I still don't know if there's going to be another AAA game like that anytime in the future. I don't know where Kojima Studios will go from here. So it just resonates a lot with me. And funnily enough, just because I know how the game plays, just like another game, Breath of the Wild, it's a game that I think I'll keep going back to. I have no intention to like railroad it all the way to the finish or anything. I just pick it up once in a while and do a quest or two, just like quietly walking through the mountains. And I don't know, it just puts me in a space that I've really been enjoying prior to the holidays and after that. However, like just around Christmas, I kind of felt sick with just a cold. Thankfully, it turned out to not be COVID, but just like a really serious cold. Though who knows, I guess. yeah, so when I was really sick, I just started another Dark Souls 1 run because it's just my comfort game on the
Yeah,
Switch.
yeah.
On the Switch, I just wanted to set myself a challenge, so I just went for Calamit's Tale and, just did a bunch of fun stuff in there.
Hmm.
And then finally really got into roguelike deck builders over the last couple of years. So Slay the Spire is just
Hmm.
one of those forever games for me. I just play it at night almost every day. So I've
Nice.
been doing that.
I'm glad I get someone coming on the show and talking about Death Stranding. Like,
Do you want to do that for 2 hours?
I was gonna say, like, I would love to do a whole episode about Death Stranding, but I either need to replay it or I need to like watch. I need to brush up on the story.
Oh yeah.
And like I'm so you said the Kojima-ness is kind of out of control, and I totally agree. But that doesn't bother me. It's just kind of a big commitment. Like, I thought about going back and buying the director's cut just to see like what weird stuff got added in since I played it. But I don't know. I've heard most criticism. I've heard almost nobody criticize the gameplay, which is weird because the gameplay is just, walking and trying to carry your stuff up a hill without falling over. And it's like super engaging and great. People criticize like the cutscenes and the story content, which I think is weird, but like I kind of liken it to those like made for TV sci-fi channel movies that are like they're purposely
Right.
shitty. And I don't think Kojima's making it purposely stupid. I think he thinks it's actually good. But to me, it's just kind of like it's almost comedy how like campy and stuff it is. It's so I was like legit laughing during a lot of the cutscenes when like serious things are happening. But the gameplay in Death Stranding is just it's incredible, and I would like to do that for like a further episode of the show. I just got to figure out like, do I actually need to replay it? Do I remember enough about it to talk intelligently, or do I have to actually go back in and do the whole thing again, which is not so enticing for me, even though I did really like it.
Yeah, and not to dwell on it too much, but like I agree with you. I think it's at its best when it feels like one of those sci-fi B movies or something,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I've seen all perspectives on it. As someone, as I said, my wife played through that game and really loved it. So, she really, emotionally resonated with a lot of the themes in there. And there are like, man, like how crazy is it that that game's plot has been vindicated by everything that's been happening since then? I guess it's like the universe, everything kind of aligned to all those themes about connection and people having to work for the sake of others, through a cataclysm, all of that stuff. It's
Sam
it's kind
Porter
of
Bridges
nuts.
is the original essential employee during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts how it just kind of all that kind of aligned. It's sad also, but yeah, it's it does its best when it's like a B movie, but I really value slowness in games, and that's something. It's kind of a perfect episode for that because Kingsfield or Ancient City especially, can be slow, and it's funny because the first 3 Kingsfield games are kind of go at like a much faster pace. They're they feel a bit more arcadey, even though I guess the rotating. I mean, we'll get into that. The rotating speed is like not as slow in those games, but that's sort of like taking a moment to yourself and treating it as a meditative experience. I value that a lot, and I've been cherishing that a lot more in the past couple of years, and getting my hands on the controller and actually feeling the weight, of everything you have to, put on your back. Just watching is one thing, but like actually making the trek, through a mountain, having to do all that is really, it is the best hiking game. It's kind of crazy. It's like, it's a genre now in my head. Like, there isn't much like it. There was a short hike. I don't know if you ever played that game. It was a very small game. You could finish it in like an hour or two. And, to me, like they're similar games in my head, because it's, create your own goals, go at your own pace, Though that's what I'm saying. Like, there are parts of Death Stranding, there are quests where it like really pushes you to do something in a time limit, or like, when the BT-ness of it kind of goes up too much, and it's asking you to brush up against some other systems, is when like, it doesn't work for me as much. But like, for me, the ideal version of Death Stranding is just giving you rough terrain, rather than throwing you in a field of BTs, right? The challenging myself on a rough terrain works for me so much more than having to mash my buttons trying to get out of, a very sticky situation.
Not to turn this into the Death Stranding episode, but I ended up playing it on like easy combat difficulty, or just straight up easy difficulty, because I'm like you, like I really valued the challenge of trying to make it over some like rough terrain, or making it, across a long gap, or figuring out stuff like that. And I didn't really value the challenge of the BT sections, but I'm totally with you that when you are just presented with like, this is, you have to get around this mountain, figure out how to do it without breaking your stuff that you're carrying. It's super engaging in a way that like people who just like reductively say, "Oh, Death Stranding, that's that walking game." Like, it's not, that's not capturing what it's actually like to walk in Death Stranding. It's oddly more engaging than you could ever expect without playing it. So I'm glad you dug it, and we'll talk about FromSoftware here in a minute. But I'm also glad to hear that Dark Souls is like your comfort game in times when you need comfort. Because I'm also the same way.
To me, it's a game which feels like I'm visiting my home or something. I know every nook and cranny. Like,
for sure,
going somewhere brings back memories. Gives me nostalgia. Like, I'll get into it more, but like, it's a game that when I played it and finished it, I had nostalgia for it. And it's a interesting experience, because my favorite media, or my favorite book or movie or thing is like that. The fondness for the place I was in when I was going through it is just so, like, it feels like a hug or something. And especially when I'm sick and like, I don't want to do anything, just lying in bed. Yeah, just, that's my game.
Yep, same. Like, if I'm, maybe if I'm feeling sick, or if I'm just like, I play a lot of games. This is like my preferred method of entertainment. I don't watch a lot of movies. I don't watch many, Netflix shows or anything like that. Sometimes I'll get into ruts where I'm like, I'm just, I'm playing a couple games. I'm not really feeling either one. So I'm just going to like start up a new Dark Souls file, and I'll play the first few levels. But like, that's kind of like you said, returning to a comfortable place. It's weird for people who are not like big Dark Souls fans, I think, to hear that, because like the games are somewhat stressful and they're difficult and all of that, but it really is like returning to a comfortable place. So I'm totally with you there. And continuing on the FromSoftware track, let's get into Kingsfield. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, so we are going to get into Kingsfield 4. I'm going to call it Kingsfield 4 because I'm not going to say Kingsfield, the ancient city, the entire time. Kingsfield is a game that will have some spoilers. There will be a spoiler section at the end of this episode, just like most episodes of the show do. So hang on for like spoiler story talk in that spoiler section, but also mostly like level experiences, set pieces, memorable moments, because if you've played any From Software game, you know that they're not so upfront with like direct storytelling, which means, as always, that I did not pick up a whole lot of story while I was playing. But we'll get into that as we go. We usually begin by giving our histories with the game and our histories with From Software, since it's such an important connection that a lot of people are going to have if they're going to go play Kingsfield for the first time, now. So, Mystic, we start with the guest first. What is your kind of history with Kingsfield 4 and From Software?
All right. Well, I'm going to have to go back to 2012, I think, when a very close friend of mine who absolutely just loved Dark Souls 1, he would just talk to me about it every time, something cool happened in that game. But as you know, like if you know nothing about the game, it just all sounds, it just goes in one ear and goes out the other ear.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is like, now I know that the way he was talking about it, it just kind of all makes sense. But just hearing over and over how things were just so hard, like that never like appealed to me that much. But he loved it so much, and now I get it because I would do something very similar at this moment. He just gifted it to me for my birthday, right? Like I would absolutely do that now if I have a very close friend and I just give them Dark Souls because, it just means so much to me. So please have it, So he gave it to me in 2012. I tried it. I played it. I remember getting up to like maybe Undead Burg or so, but I gave up because I was just dying too much. And, I think I also had Mass Effect 3 maybe around that time. So I just jumped back into other games. I think Portal or whatever too. And I just never played Dark Souls, which is kind of funny because like a lot of people have a very similar experience of like playing it and then stopping it and getting back to it at some point. But and then 2015, mid 2015 or so, I got a PS4. I wanted some exclusives, so I picked up Bloodborne.
I was going to say, we know what that means. PS4, one exclusives, there we go.
That's right. And I think I remember watching playthroughs of it. It just looks so stylish. And I knew it was probably going to be hard again, but I just, I wanted something to play. I was willing to, try it. And I don't know why I made the decision, having given up on Dark Souls. I don't know why I picked up Bloodborne. I think something about how dynamic it just felt and, how people are just praising it so much. It just had so much critical love, pouring everywhere. So I picked it up, and I think it was when I beat Cleric Beast or so that something happened, I think that night, everything clicked into place like machinery, like in my head, like I kind of get it. I kind of get what's happening here. I did feel a bit accomplished, but that's the cheapest thing about it. I feel like the feeling accomplished, with the game. Now I don't like really put that much value on it or anything, but it did hit those emotional buttons in my head. But also like just all the enemies talking to you in a weird way when you're fighting them, or like just the mystery of it, just how every corner seemed to have something crazy going on or whatever, and like what is going on in this game kind of thing. That just really hooked me. But the funny thing about all of this is that I think I got through like midway through Bloodborne, maybe up to Vicar Amelia or so, and like I was just dying so much, and I just didn't have the hang of the game that much or whatever. I don't even know how I beat Gascoigne, honestly. So I kind of gave up on Bloodborne. I stopped playing it. And I still had my Dark Souls 1 disc and my PS3 still hooked up. So I was like, all right, let me go back to Dark Souls 1. Because I remember it being slower. And this game has had enough going on that I kind of want to give Dark Souls 1 a chance again. And the weird osmosis of like picking up the lessons I did from Bloodborne, coming back to Dark Souls 1, seeing things beyond Undead Burg where I'd like written off it as like, all right, I'm just going to have a whole bunch of zombies come up to me in this game and it's just going to be hard. But like getting beyond Undead Burg and like everything kind of clicking into place, I just had maybe the perfect playthrough of Dark Souls 1. Like everything was perfect. I was playing it at the perfect times of day, early in the mornings and the weekends, feeling like a little kid. just everything like that could, if a developer was probably sitting, next to me, he would probably be very happy, like
Mhm.
everything, like, Lautrec destroying Firelink Shrine, me struggling through Blighttown. I remember entering Blighttown and like everything, the frame rate crashing to 10 as the title screen came up, and me dying. That was just crazy. But
Yeah.
like just the ascent into an Orlando, like all of the experience, like it just hit like a primal chord in my body. Like I used to love the Prince of Persia games growing up, and I was also a big fan of like mythology and like medieval, sort of sort of like that dungeon core kind of like it kind of took me back to like when I was a kid and playing games, like
Mhm.
the feeling of it. Obviously, I didn't understand everything what that was happening in the lore and all that, but like it was just so perfect that it's my favorite game of all time. Dark Souls 1 is my favorite game of all time. Funnily enough, Bloodborne is the one that hooked me to get me into it, and I love that game a lot as well. But
Mhm.
yeah, as I said, like when I finished Dark Souls 1, I immediately had nostalgia for it. Like I still do. I can't put it into words. It's just so special to me. And I really opened my eyes to what video games can be. And like it's funnily enough, I looked at every video game a different way after that. It's like it made me want to engage with the ins and outs of the systems of every game. I pushed myself to play harder or like different genres of games that I wouldn't have played. It was just, it is kind of funnily enough a turning point for me.
Mhm.
It's so widely praised that it might feel like hyperbole to a lot of people, but like it is, there's a reason it's widely praised, right? And I might have had the same experience as a lot of people that praised it, but it's still a real experience and it still means a lot.
Right.
And
And so
yeah,
like
and
that I was going to say that love for Dark Souls like obviously got you to kind of check out the stuff that's, in From Software's history.
right. I mean, immediately I played through Dark Souls 2 because I hadn't played that, and I played through Demon's Souls because I still had a PS3. I remember, like, I think I finished all those games like maybe by the time 2016 ended. I was through 1, 2, Demon's Souls, and Bloodborne. I was just it's crazy. Like I'm sure all of us have ever had this experience, or like people that are watching you are like, "What is going on? Like, why are you so obsessed with this stuff?" But yeah, I also joined the Duckfeed community. I was listening to all these podcasts a lot, and I remember the Duckfeed guys covering Kingsfield, and yeah, I was just on wiki holes searching internet content about this game and this developer, and I just really deeply got. I remember listening to the Kingsfield 4 soundtrack. And before I even played the game, it was just a mainstay in my playlist for a while because just, again, like there's something about it that just hits all the buttons for me,
Hmm.
I just use it as a calming, soundtrack during work or something. And like before I even played the game. So by the time I started the game, I knew the soundtrack back to front. So I got it like a used PS2 for very cheap, and the Kingsfield 4 translated version. And I played it on my PS2. And yeah, since then I've checked out the Shadow Tower games. I've played Eternal Ring. I've tried the Kingsfield 2 and 3. I haven't finished them, but I have kind of mid-halted playthroughs of those in my emulator. So yeah, so it might be a very similar story to a lot of people that fell in love with these games. But yeah, it's...
Hmm. Yeah, I think like I don't know. I think for the majority of people that are listening to this show, and for me too, like the later games, like the Souls games, are going to be the thing that makes people curious about the earlier From Software games. Because I don't know this for sure, but I have to assume that Kingsfield 4 wasn't a huge success on the PS2.
Not at all. And it had also received like very middling reviews. I mean, not that I don't know how much reviews meant back then, because like, especially with the PS2 era, it just kind of feels like, word of mouth and like, you just have one or two video games that you'd have, and like
Right.
those would be what you were obsessed with. So people, they are cult video games in that way, obviously. So the critical analysis might not mean too much by now, but yeah, I don't think, yeah, they weren't that popular. I just, the reevaluation of them, I think they stand up much, really well. But compared to the games of their time, I don't think you can call them big successes at all.
Right. So like for my own history with this, like I didn't have a PS2 when I was younger, and like I had a lot of friends that had PS2s, but I never heard anyone talk about Kingsfield or any of the other, From Software games. Like, frankly, I thought, as many people may assume, I thought From Software started with Demon's Souls, which is obviously not the case. They're much, much older than that. But like you, I'm a huge fan of the Souls games. I had a similar experience with Dark Souls. We're getting into this thing again where, because I record these episodes so far in advance, there will be a Dark Souls episode that is out by the time this episode is out. And in that episode, I talk about how I bounced off of Dark Souls because of Capra Demon my first time, and I quit, and I came back 6 months later and fell in love. And it's basically the same story as you. And I also had that thing where I played Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, and Dark Souls 2 basically for the first time, all in the span of 1 year.
Yeah. You just want more. You just want more.
And Sekiro too, all within basically the same year and a half. And also, like you, I'm a big fan of the podcast Bonfire Side Chat that's been mentioned on this show several times. I think it's basically the definitive podcast for Souls games and Souls-like and From Software games. So, like you, I heard them talking about Kingsfield, and I was like, oh, cool. Well, I don't have a PS2, so I'm not going to play that. But then I remembered that emulators are possible. And so I was tooling around with seeing what emulators would work on my terrible PC that I've mentioned many times on the show. PS2 emulator works. And so I was looking at games, and I was like, oh, well, a lot of the stuff I want to play has been re-released. I would like to play Final Fantasy X, but they did a remaster, so I don't need to fool around with PS2 stuff. But then I was like, oh, shit, Kingsfield, I've heard that game is interesting. I'll try that on the emulator. And so I gave it a download. I tried it out a few months later when I was feeling, I kind of had a sort of an idea of what to expect, and when I was in that mood, I decided to check it out. Full disclosure for people listening, I played about 5 hours without a guide in Kingsfield. I did not get very far. I don't even think I made it out of the city ruins, the first real level. So I pulled up a guide. I watched some Let's Plays from Cole from Duckfeed, his Let's Play, and that really helped me kind of get the hang of what I was supposed to do. So I did play this entire game with a guide, and I played it emulated, and I used save states every 30 seconds. I'm so glad that I did.
Yes.
I 100% would not have made it through this game without save states. So I just want to get that, up front for everybody. My playthrough took me about 25 hours, I would say, if people are listening and you're curious, how long these games take. It took me about 25 hours. That is with save states, though, so I can only assume that if you're dying and have to walk back from, the checkpoints that are pretty sparse, it's going to take a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, quick note about that. Absolutely, we all should normalize save states. We should normalize cloud saves in AAA games. I think the difficulty portion of all these games is obviously overrated, as we all know. And normalize cheating, normalize mods, normalize, save states, normalize cloud saves. It's absolutely, if it leads you to have a much better experience, I think we should absolutely do it. And totally, I think having a guide is definitely helpful, especially because the age of the game, and sometimes and that could be a fault of the game as well. There are many places where you want to put a key in something and it doesn't seem to be working, even though you have to do that, and you're just not in the right place. And when you're putting the key in, and you just maybe get stuck for an hour, instead of that, you could just look it up and save yourself that pain.
Yeah, I've said this on the show before, but I play games with guides most of the time. If it's a game that has things like that, and I get the feeling if I hit a couple points in the game where I'm I have no idea what I'm supposed to do next. I'm not the type of person who's just going to poke at every single corner in the game until I find the next path, unless it's I think that's what I do in Souls games, but a lot of older games are not very good at like letting you know at least like where you're supposed to go next. And Kingsfield's no different from that, I don't think. So like I am trying to normalize this on this show, using guides, use save states, whatever you got to do to get like the best experience out of a game, especially something like this. No shame in that at all from my perspective. So
Yes.
We're going to get into the basic like mechanics and how this game works in Kingsfield. And we're going to start by talking about like connections to later FromSoftware games, because this is the perspective that I think a lot of people are going to go into Kingsfield 4 with, the perspective of somebody who has already played Dark Souls. And I assume if you're digging in the deeper FromSoftware catalog that you like Dark Souls. And it's something that you value. I really can't imagine someone being like, I really hate Dark Souls and I don't like Bloodborne. I want to play the old FromSoft games. I really can't imagine someone saying that. So, like this frame of reference of having played later games is going to be what I think a lot of people are going into this game with. So, I don't know. Do you agree with that? Before I drag you into this conversation.
Absolutely. I totally agree with it. And it also is very good archaeology, I think, if you're a Souls fan. Which is what we all love to do in these games, is look at ruined kingdoms. FromSoftware is not a ruined kingdom, but it is great to go back, and I am of the firm belief that FromSoftware is actually a very deeply iterative studio. People have complaints about some of the newer games sort of like having callbacks. Some of them I agree with. Sometimes, not to get into that stuff too much, but like sometimes it can kind of be too on the nose, and like
some of the stuff in Dark Souls 3 and stuff.
Right,
like
it can
that.
feel redundant.
Yeah, I get it.
It can feel redundant, or like not really serving like a larger purpose, even though, again, there are people that disagree, or like, I love all these games, it's fine. But, but I'm of the firm belief that they're a very iterative studio. And like, if you go back to their very first video game, Kingsfield 1, Kingsfield is Dark Souls, is Armored Core, is Bloodborne, is Sekiro. Again, Sekiro is not a Souls game, but I hope people are getting what I'm saying. It's like there are certain things about the sort of heart at the center of these games that's very FromSoftware. The first Kingsfield game. There's challenge. There's crestfallen, or like there's a dragon. There's like a early boss that you'll die to. There's traps that are that the game wants you to be respectful of. There's systems on systems that like intersect in interesting ways. There's the game teaching you a language and then sort of telling you a story using that language, or like integrating a system into that. There, all of those hallmarks of like modern FromSoftware games are in their older games.
Right, and like I don't want to project too much when I say this, but like I thought, and I assume other people also think or just associate like everything that you like about Dark Souls games you associate with Miyazaki, because he is an auteur now. People are calling him an auteur for this type of game. But by playing Kingsfield and knowing that Miyazaki didn't work on Kingsfield, he didn't even work for the company at the time, you start to see like this is a FromSoftware thing, and Miyazaki brought stuff to the company and to the Souls series, but like this is not all him. This is stuff that was here before he even worked for the company. So that was kind of cool for me to kind of discover and think about.
Yeah, and it's true of a lot of Japanese companies, which is what I hear. It's not like I know it from personal experience or anything, but like a lot of companies are legacy companies, especially video game companies. It's a big deal if teams or big names kind of move away from a studio they've been affiliated with for a long time. And similarly in FromSoftware, like a lot of people that work in that studio are like, they come with the furniture, you know. My favorite example of this is like the music, right? Like for there's a core, you know, group of people that create music for FromSoftware games. You can look it up. They gave themselves a name. I think they play as a band and everything too. They're called Frequency. And, you know, modern names that we know about, such as Yuka Kitamura, who's done music for like some of the modern FromSoftware games, Tsukasa Saito, I'm blanking on a couple other names, but like, you know, they've all been working on it. Like Yuka Kitamura worked on Armored Core games. There's Kota Hoshino, who worked on the Armored Core music, who's done sound design for some of the Souls games. So they're, you know, obviously, like, not to like go into credit sheets and compare like which companies don't work like that. There's going to be a lot of like intersection, and like there's going to be a lot of cross-pollination between different members, and it's more complicated than that. But like there's definitely there's a heart to it, as I said, that kind of remains constant. Like, you know, a lot of people worked on these things for a long time, and like it's no coincidence that Miyazaki went to work for FromSoftware, right? Like there's that famous story of him like playing Ico and like deciding he wants to make video games like in the middle of his life, I think after 35 or so. Having worked at Oracle or whatever, and like giving that up to want to go make video games. And it's no coincidence that he went and worked for FromSoftware. Like he's a big fan of tabletop RPGs. He loves the Kingsfield games. Like that was like a big part of him growing up and loving the medium. Like he has a huge amount of respect for Naotoshi Jin, who's like one of the founder. He's the founder of FromSoftware, and he had a big, you know, hand in the early Kingsfield games. You know, he has a lot of respect and admiration for the guy, and that's why he joined FromSoftware. Now, we know the story of Demon's Souls, right? Like, you know, it was a flagging project. They wanted to compete with some of the more action-y Western titles. Like, that's why the project was founded. And all that dynamism, the action RPG-ness of it, the third-person perspective, were all demands for the project. And Miyazaki deserves a whole lot of credit for, like, taking that, making it what it is, sort of stamping his design sensibilities in there, sort of maybe borrowing upon the Kingsfield sensibilities, and then bringing his own thing. You know, his way of like maybe expressing the story in a more presentable way, I think, compared to the older games. Even though Dark Souls is considered obtuse, I think it's not, in my opinion. There's a lot that the game gives you if you're willing to, you know, look at it, you know.
Yeah. So it definitely gives you a lot more than Kingsfield does. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, yeah, he definitely deserves credit for their success, but you know, it becomes very obvious if you play their older games that there's more to that. Yeah.
Right. And so like before we get into talking about like special things for Kingsfield, just kind of quickly run through some of the things that if you play it, you'll recognize, like these are things that FromSoftware is still doing to this day. Maybe not so much in Sekiro, but definitely all the way through Dark Souls 3. And by the time this episode comes out, Elden Ring will be out, and I assume a lot of it's going to be similar in Elden Ring too. So the first thing that I wrote down is that this is like the same kind of, it's not the same style and pace of combat, but it is that like very deliberate combat where enemies have attacks that have specific tells or wind-ups, and you have to learn the enemy attacks, you have to learn their wind-ups, you have to use kind of the same strategies that get you through a Souls game, you know, fight enemies one at a time, use bottlenecks, be smart about like when and how to engage enemies, try to get cheap damage however you can, stuff like that. It's all in Kingsfield 4 as well, that kind of strategy in combat.
The slower pace of it does take time to get used to it. You know, if you're especially not used to playing some of the older games, and like it is like, you know, let's not make any bones about it. It is slow. Like you'll notice it. Like
we'll get into that when we talk about like specific Kingsfield combat, but it is slow. It's slow.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever played like Super Hexagon,
No.
but it's a very popular phone game that it requires a lot of twitch reflexes. And one of the things that that's a good key to like getting good at the game is like there are different levels, and like you kind of ramp up to the fastest level, which requires the most reflexes, right? And then you play
Mm-hmm.
a few seconds of that, and then you go back to the early level, and then you suddenly find yourself finding it much easier.
Yeah.
It's just a throwaway example that I used, but I really do think that kind of happens in some of these older Kingsfield games. Is like if you spend enough time with it, you do begin to see like the skeleton, of the game, like the Matrix, right? Like all of the enemies, their wind-ups, the blind spots, the weird circle strafing that you do, the traps that you face, and everything. You kind of find out that they're all designed to be in sync with the pace that you're playing at. So if you spend like an hour, hour and a half, or 2 hours in the game, you just kind of get used to that pace. And again, this might not be everyone's experience. If you're absolutely finding it tedious, stop playing the game. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's okay.
For sure.
Yeah, I do think there's value there, and like I think there is some design cohesion there, and like when you spend enough time in there, it kind of clicks.
Yeah, it does for sure. Like you'll start out the game and you'll be like, holy shit, this is slow. Like I've played Demon Souls and I've played Dark Souls. Those are slow compared to the later games in their catalog. But Kingsfield is slow. And like it takes some time to get used to. But like you said, the enemies are also really slow for the most part. And so like it's not like the game is like unfair because you're slow. Like the whole thing is slow. So once you bring yourself down to that speed and realize how you can take advantage of enemies, it ends up being that same kind of strategy in combat that you would do in a Souls game.
Absolutely.
And a couple other things that this has in common with later games in the series, features a large interconnected world with shortcuts to open, interconnected in the same way that Dark Souls 1 is interconnected, not like Demon Souls is not interconnected. Dark Souls 1 is. So picture how you're going through the Undead Parish, you take that elevator down, suddenly you're back in Firelink Shrine. Holy shit. There are moments like that in Kingsfield 4 because this is all just one interconnected world. And I personally had a very hard time because there's like a central tower, like nexus
Right.
area in Kingsfield 4. And that area opens up to all of the other areas. I had a hard time like mapping that mentally until you get that like incredible map at the very end of the game. I had a really hard time mapping that out, but it is interconnected. And if you're the type of person to draw your own maps and stuff like that, this could be something cool. But just want to point out that it does have that interconnectedness.
Right. And I agree. I do think I truly empathize with anyone just not finding it easy to make a mental map. I just it's a personal thing, right? I have trouble with that in certain games where others find it easy. Like even in Souls games, right? Like some things are easy for others and hard for others, and like. But for me personally, like for my sensibilities and like the way I like to play, I think I was just extremely immersed, and I think I had a great time because So one interesting thing about the game, and I've seen this point made somewhere else, I can't remember now, is like the game has like weird asymmetry sometimes in that, like, if you're presented like a design of a structure that you're entering and there's a left and the right side to it, most of the time in the game, you're not going to find like the same thing on the left as you do on the right. There's a conscious effort to like make a difference in like what's happening when you go to the right versus the left. So that sort of thing helped me a lot. I do agree completely that the central tower, there's a bit of sameness to like the sort of design there. But the spokes that they lead out to, I had a much easier time like knowing that, hey, if I go to the left, I'm ending up in this dungeon ecosystem. And then for me, again, it was easy to like remember like which things were locked, so that when I was entering from the other side of that thing, I could sense, hey, I'm like reaching a shortcut, or like hey, I can something, my spidey senses are tingling, and it's kind of telling me I'm getting back to the central tower. And there's a lot of places in the game too where like you sort of finish a spoke and you're kind of done with the sort of big set piece or the big thing, and you're kind of sensing that, okay, now is the moment that the game's going to send me back to the central tower, because now I have a new thing that I can use to go somewhere else. So I personally had a good time with it, but I completely agree with you. Like when you first enter the central tower or like look at it, it can feel a bit samey.
Yeah, and the thing that really saves that too is like the music. There's music in all of the levels, unlike Dark Souls. So like the music's great. You'll spend a lot of time in the levels and you'll get to know that song, and then you'll like be pushing through a level, you'll open a door, and suddenly the music for like another level that you've been to before will start playing. You're like, oh, okay, I know exactly where I am now, just because I remember that song. So they do a little bit more to help you kind of remember the areas than later games, which famously don't have any music as you're going through the levels. Another thing that is cool about, or another thing that is continued throughout the Souls series, are stamina systems. The stamina, I think, is much more important in Kingsfield than it is in Souls. Like, you have to manage, like, capital M, manage your stamina in this game, like, actively, as opposed to Souls, where you kind of into it, like, okay, I can get this full weapon combo in before I'm out of stamina, then I need to back off and let it refill. In Kingsfield, stamina basically governs your effectiveness or ability to do anything. So, like, you really have to stay on top of it. So, but that is one thing they continued throughout their games, is this focus on stamina management.
Right, and yeah, it's definitely can be more punishing because of the general pace of the game. Like if you run out of stamina and you're and you attempt to do an action, the game, you do kind of stumble, or like there's a bit of I don't remember if there's like a screen shake, but you do kind of get stuck in place a little bit, like if you attempt to do an action when it runs out. And then the other thing is like you do less damage if your bar is not full, right?
You do significantly less damage. Like that was part of what was really hard at the beginning of the game for me, was like, if your stamina is not absolutely full, your sword will just clank off of enemies, and they will not do the flash red like you injured them thing. And so like my first maybe hour of the game, I just didn't figure this out on my own. And that was something that watching a Let's Play was like, oh, okay, yes. I get it now just by watching somebody else. But it wasn't very intuitive. And like, there's like these, piranha plant looking things in the first level, and I was just like, my sword was just clanking off of them, and I was like, why can't I hurt these things? Like, what is wrong with me right now? Am I starting out like such a piece of shit that I can't even damage anything?
Yeah, like, and in hindsight, those plant enemies are kind of perfect to like learn that, I think, how to kind of pace yourself and like take a step back, do the attack at the right time, and then that kind of opens that third eye, and you think, oh, this is so like Souls. Like, that's what I'm kind of doing in Souls, is like managing my stamina. Absolutely, that's either that. And then going back to what I was saying earlier about how the game kind of tailors itself to the pace that it's going at, I do find that the enemy complexity also kind of ties into that, the systems on systems thing, where like, the tougher enemies or the toughest enemies kind of force you to learn your spacing such that you're sort of managing your stamina bar the best, right? Like,
yeah.
You'll have knights that like do a poke at you and then do a big slash. Those could be the simpler knights, and then you'll later find like skeletons or other knights that do poke, or like two pokes at once and then take a step back or whatever. And like you kind of learn how to like go there behind, or like strafe, or like manage your stamina based on that pace. And then you also find weapons that kind of use the stamina in a weird way. Like I don't know if you ended up finding or using the weapons that do the triple slashes, or like some of the magic spells that, you know, do multiple attacks at once. You can kind of,
it doesn't ring a bell. No,
you can kind of take advantage of that and, like, you know, use a single stamina bar to like pump out more damage, you know, things like that. Yeah, so there's definitely like that complexity there, but yeah, it's very, very important to manage.
100%. And like once I figured out like the combat rhythm in Dark Souls or Bloodborne is like full weapon combo, back off, let stamina recharge. Once I realized that in Kingsfield it's literally swing once, back off, let it recharge. Once I got that down, it was fine, and you adjust. You know, it's not so bad.
Real quick, to another thing people might not, you know before they look at a guide if they want to play this game. The way your weapons level up is by actually using the weapon and like doing combat with it. Funnily enough, like you can watch speedruns of this, and I remember watching a speedrun of it a really long time back. Actually, one of the most viable strategies is to actually use your fists to fight all the plants in the beginning. So if you actually spend like 15 or 20 minutes fighting those plants, your fists can be leveled up enough that you could just use those for the rest of the game, and you could just do the speedrun that way.
Oh, that's cool.
That's funny. So yeah, so that's very important to remember as well. Like if you want to level up a spell or a weapon, you want to be using that a lot. And then that's how you can farm enemies as well. And then like another quick thing about weapons or like spells actually is that you can get a spell, and then the upgraded version or the leveled up version of that spell has more properties. You'll have an earth heal that'll heal you, but the upgraded version of it will also slow down enemies. Things like that.
And you definitely want to upgrade your weapons so they do more damage, of course.
This is something that people can never find out if they don't look at a guide.
You'll figure that out because you'll use a weapon unless you're switching weapons all the time. I figured this out just because like I was using a favorite weapon and it was like, oh, your weapon upgraded to level 2, and I was like, oh, okay, sweet, I got that. I obviously didn't like send it to the blacksmith for upgrades, so that's how that works. Funnily enough, in Kingsfield, in my opinion, and I wonder if it's your opinion too, sending your weapons to the blacksmith to be upgraded is a colossal waste of time, because it uses real time, and you will get a bump of like, say your attack power is like 173. You'll send it in. You have to wait 5 real minutes or 10 real minutes without your weapon, and you'll get it back, and it'll be attack 174, and it's nothing compared to leveling it up via using it. I thought that was absolutely bizarre.
It is bizarre.
And I only used the blacksmith to repair weapons that were broken or almost broken.
Yeah, I don't know if you watched Iron Pineapple's video on Kingsfield 4 that he did, like I think a few months back. That blacksmith is totally ripping you off, because like if you can level up a whole bunch of weapons and it'll take the same time versus like one weapon taking the same time. So that's a viable strategy. Just like use up a whole bunch of weapon durability and give all of them at once and go make yourself coffee or whatever. But yeah, it's ridiculous. Any new weapon you find, it turns out, is just going to be better, and like you're going to be switching between like so many different kinds of elemental weapons. And like once you hit the mid game stretch, the game just throws so much cool treasure at you that like you just any new cool thing you find is just going to be better. And I really, really hope that comes back in Elden Ring. I've kind of been a little tired of like some of the recent Souls games where you like find something and like there's no point to using it, you know?
Right.
It's the end of the game. So
based on your build and stuff like that, for sure. And like I said, by the time this episode comes out, Elden Ring will be out, and we'll know the answer to that. Hopefully, you're just getting cool treasure. A couple other things real quick that kind of connect this to the later games from FromSoftware. We have like a proto Estus Flask system here, and I would kind of like, this is a mashup of like Estus Flask, like rechargeable healing, and empty bottles in Zelda games, because you do just pick up these crystal vials and you can fill them at these fountains. You can choose to fill them with health or magic potions, and then later one that does both. I always filled them up with magic, because then you can use that vial to heal one time with a health potion, or you can use it to refill your magic and then use that earth heal spell to heal 16 times. So I always did magic, always. Plus, leveling up that earth heal spell is absolutely worth your time. Yes,
it's really cool. And yeah, I love the crystal system. I think, it is the basis for Estus, right? So
because those crystals don't go away. These are reusable items. They just empty and you have to go fill them up again. That's why we're making the connection to Estus.
Yeah, and like all of the sort of visual landmarks and like set pieces where you fill them up are like super cool. I just love going back to them. That's a sort
the one
of
in the tower is the one in the tower is so cool.
Yeah, the forest one too. Like that feeling of like going home to Majula to do something that's really cool.
Yeah.
I love the save point system. I just use the stones, the colored stones, and sort of set your bookmarks in different areas. There's a certain element of DIY-ness to it, all of that, right? Like make your own sort of trade routes to, go farm something if you want, or like set something, near a merchant, or like, the forest area to refill stuff, or like, close chests, set a bookmark there so you can go back there whenever you want. Just all of that just comes together so well for me near the mid game. Like I just love when like there's that element of DIY-ness, and then the game's just like chugging on rails in the mid game, and like that feeling of like just all guns blazing. Just I'm doing everything I want to do in an RPG is just so cool. That whole all of the systems working that way is amazing.
Yeah, you're definitely kind of customizing, especially with like how you want to fill up those flasks. You're customizing like what you want to prioritize and stuff like that. Even though I think there is a clear like best way to do it, it's still up to you to do it the way you want. Couple other
there's
things.
also that ring of clarity, I believe, which is like a must wear item.
Yeah.
Like it's like without it, like you would just have no mana at all. So
right. The item description in there like made me think that it was going to be like some huge trade-off too. Like I was very like hesitant to put it on, but you're right. Like if you're planning on using spells at all, you have to get and equip this item called like the amulet or bracelet of clarity or something like that. That, like you said, without it, you can cast like 2 spells, and with it, you can cast like 20 spells.
I did hear that the catch with that apparently is that if you don't have it and you use your spells, they can level up faster. However, how are you going to be farming without the ring if you're just using two? I don't know how it works, but like I just never take that ring off is my tip.
100%. The entire game, leave that ring, amulet of clarity, whichever one it is. And a couple other things that will continue into the Souls series. We already mentioned briefly cryptic storytelling, NPC dialogue that is weird and saying a lot but not saying a lot. And you'll find these like tablets around the world that have kind of like lore snippets on them. The story is told very indirectly as they continue to do throughout the series. And we'll get into kind of like what's going on in the story a little bit later on, but do want to make that connection. The last thing I want to mention is maybe the most important thing in Souls games, which is that there are secret walls that will turn into doors. If you'll kind of get a sense as you play the game where you'll be like, there's probably an invisible door in here. I need to go kind of basically hump the wall until I open it. And you'll start out humping every wall, but you will kind of get a sense as you go, like, that wall looks suspicious. I better go check that out. And, a not insignificant portion of them actually do have secret doors with cool treasure inside of them.
Yeah, if I don't know if you've saw gameplay or like seen the earlier Kingsfield games, but like those are an absolute nightmare to find secret walls in because that sort of sameness, and I think it's just a product of like those games being so early and like, you know, so much more low texture, but like low res texture, but like it's so much harder to find secret walls in there. And I think in Kingsfield, and especially the Shadow Tower game, Shadow Tower Abyss especially, they do such a good job of like making it somewhat or like mostly obvious where secret walls will be. Like, you know, if you have like curved walls or like stone or rock, it's very unlikely. There's like most of the time secret walls will be like, you know, a flat surface, you know, so it'll become very obvious if you're going through a room and like something looks flat, or like, I don't know if it's a product of the emulator, but I've seen emulator gameplay of this game, and like sometimes the secret walls kind of give off a feeling of like textured differently in the emulator. I don't know if that's true. Maybe I'm making that up.
Maybe.
And then one more thing is like there are maps in this game. They're kind of useless maps through most of the game. Through 70% of the game, you'll have maps that are useless. But like near the end, you get something called a King's Map, I believe. And that one's actually pretty useful because it'll show you secret walls as well. And it'll give you like that 3D representation. But by the time it's too late in the game, it's kind of useful if you just want to do a roundup and find all the secret walls or something. So
there's another item too that I think it's like a ring or something like that that will highlight invisible walls as green. But like that's like in the last third of the game. So like the first, you know, 2/3, I would say you're going around pressing A or pressing X or whatever on every single wall you come across. So
it's like Dark Souls 2.
Right. Okay, so we're going to take a little music break. When we come back, we're going to stop talking about connections to later games, and we're going to talk about what it's like to actually play Kingsfield 4. Okay, we're back, and we're going to talk about the gameplay in Kingsfield 4. And the first thing I want to talk about is, as any modern gamer going back to Kingsfield 4 will probably notice right away, is that the controls in this game were a real rough adjustment for me at the beginning. So, like, I'm going to talk about the default control scheme here. There is a remapping option. I'm sure your emulators will let you remap too, but like the game actually has one, but I could not get it to work. It was one of those things where it's like you have to assign a new input to an action, but the inputs are all taken. So like it wouldn't accept me changing an input because they're all full already. And, you know, anyway, I tried for a few minutes. I couldn't figure it out. I gave up and I got used to the original controls, but like, so let me just explain this for people listening. You have tank controls on the left stick. Basically, you move front, back, or you push it to the side to turn. The right stick is used to look up or down, but it's inverted, and I couldn't change it. So I was playing on a Nintendo Switch Pro controller plugged in to my computer. And the left and right triggers are also used to look up and down. So that's what I used. So tank controls on the left stick using the triggers to look up and down took a long time, but like after maybe 5 hours, I was very, very comfortable with it. I'm not saying I want to play every game this way. Absolutely the fuck not. But I did get used to it. And then just other weird controls, dude, like X opens the menu. Square uses magic, triangle attacks, circle is sprint, and the L1 and R1 buttons are used for strafing left and right.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if you're playing this if you're not like a Souls enthusiast. Like, oh man. And actually, I'm surprised your emulator didn't let you remap successfully. I've got like some friends in other communities that like much like deeply into these older games, and they actually do a lot of good like technical help with that stuff. So maybe after this, maybe I'll go ask them, or maybe we can put a tip or something for people that want to do it and or failing at it. But as I said, I played it on a used PS2. I played it on the original PS2 controls, and yeah, it definitely took me time as well. It didn't take me 5 hours. It took me maybe an hour or two. I think by the time I finished the early like poison mine section, like I think I was good, you know. But absolutely, it's bonkers. Like it is absolutely. Don't begrudge you hating the control scheme at first.
It's just very weird. Like control schemes these days are extremely homogenous to the point where like the biggest difference is like, do you use the triggers to attack, or do you use, you know, circle and triangle on the PlayStation controller, or like square and X or something like that. But like using the shoulder buttons to strafe and using the triggers to look up and down was like just extremely odd at the beginning. And I don't think it was like my emulator wouldn't let me. It's like the game settings have control remapping, but I couldn't get that to work. And I'm already running my emulator through Steam so I can have the controller support like natively without, I'm not a super tech person. Like I don't like fiddling in menus. It stresses me out. So like I was running it through Steam to get native controller support so I wouldn't have to fuck with anything in the menus. I'm sure that the emulator would have helped, but I was already just like, just let me get into the game and start playing, you know? And like I said, I got used to it. I beat the game. It's not like this is a fatal thing, but it is weird, and anyone who's going to go in and play it, you got to know just how odd these controls are. Yeah. This game's extremely slow, as we mentioned before, like slow. Like when you swing your weapon, and I'm not exaggerating here, it takes a couple seconds for your weapon to fully swing. It's like you're using like an ultra greatsword all the time. But enemy weapons are also super slow. So you just got to get in this pace. It's not like you're slow just to fuck you over as the player, you know?
Yes, that's absolutely true. But I do think that there's variety as well, right? Like,
there is, yeah.
You fight, for example, like skeletons, or, you know, who'll do the classic skeleton juking, you know, they'll move to the right, like real fast, or like, pull out a real quick attack, but when you're least expecting it. And as I said, like much later in the game, as you're progressing, like the difficulty comes in like them designing a variety of enemies. Like there are knights that are doing multi-attacks at once, or like, weird snake enemies that will do hops.
That are doing kung fu moves.
And they're just doing Tetsumaki. Like they're just doing hurricane kicks everywhere. That's super cool. But like, I agree. It's slow. It's definitely slow.
The thing that is the slowest, I think, and took like I don't think I ever quite got used to this, to turn your character around, like a 180 turn, takes 5 seconds to turn around. I actually counted this. I counted 10 seconds for a full 360-degree turn, which if something is attacking you from behind, it takes, 5 seconds, 5 whole ass seconds to turn around and see what's hitting you from behind. Which is weird. But how you get around that is you will figure out how to use this weird tank control and shoulder button strafe control scheme to circle strafe, like you would in later, all these later games that have like targeting systems that automatically circle strafe you. You'll figure out how to do it in this game, I promise. It's weird as fuck at first, but you will figure it out.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be FromSoftware if they didn't take advantage of the fact that you have a blind spot when you're doing those turns and stuff like that. Like there are some devious traps and like, again, enemy patterns that like absolutely take advantage of the fact, because they know that you're going to be strafing or like doing a certain thing with this enemy. So like, they'll design group enemy combat or like a trap that, you won't expect, again, like all of that, again, is a fun learning curve for me, but like, absolutely. Like, it can be weird.
It definitely can. This is weird actually, because people who listen to the show and people who know me as a gamer know that I don't really like, I don't really like older games that much. And a lot of older games start you out with this lack of direction, lack of instruction, and stuff like that. And I don't have a problem with that in particular, but I think a lot of older games build difficulty in really like bullshit ways. I don't think that's the case in this game a lot. And so when like you've mentioned, when I was dropped in at the beginning and you have this big adjustment period trying to figure out all of this stuff, it was honestly like a pretty tough, but like there was something pulling me back. Like there's this really magical thing at the beginning of this game when I'm presented with all of this weird stuff that like should put me off. Just judging on like my other tendencies, the way that I play and enjoy games. There's just something really special about this game, though, in the first few hours when you're dropped in. You have this weird as fuck music. You have these weird controls. You have these weird NPCs that are kind of like half telling you what you're supposed to do, but not really. It's the first level. I really equate to the first time I played Dark Souls and like trying to get through the Undead Burg for the first time. It was a really comparable, like similarly magical experience for me.
Right, absolutely. And like there's that claustrophobic immersion. It can, like, I remember like when I finished playing this game, I was almost wondering like if I played it. I mean, I loved it so much, but I haven't played it since again. Like, you know, I currently kind of live this game a lot. Like, you know, I watch a lot of LPs and like talk about it a lot with like people and like listen to the music like almost all the time and everything. But there is like that sort of oppressive claustrophobia that is like really you have to. It is like the video game taking you to another space feeling, right? Like you're something about the design like puts you in that world in a weird way. And like, yeah, I totally agree. Like the curve can feel like Undead Burg or 1-1. In hindsight, I do think this game shares a lot of sensibilities with Dark Souls 2. And I do think like some of the designs of Dark Souls 2, like especially like the more claustrophobic enclosed spaces in Dark Souls 2, which a lot of people had problems with, like with their textures and stuff like that. I think that's the sort of older sensibilities of FromSoft shining through in that game. Doesn't work for everyone, but I think Dark Souls 2 shares a lot with these older games, and I don't think it's a coincidence that, you know, Miyazaki and his team left to work on Bloodborne, leaving
right.
Other members working on Dark Souls 2. And as I said, it's never that clean. There's always going to be cross-pollination between teams and stuff like that, but I do think it's not a coincidence that, to me, like the Dark Souls 2 shares a lot, you know, in terms of like the claustrophobic textures and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And let it be on the record that I love Dark Souls 2.
Yeah,
people who I don't really understand people who say like, I love Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Dark Souls 3, and I hate Dark Souls 2. I don't get it. I love Dark Souls 2. I love all my children equally, but especially Dark Souls 2. Back to Kingsfield, we actually have already talked about a lot of the combat, how it's very deliberate. Your weapon swings take a long time. You need to manage your stamina like in a very deliberate way. Like, again, really manage your stamina. You can, while you're getting into the combat, you will eventually figure out this rhythm. And it's this very special thing in Kingsfield for maybe the other Kingsfield games. Maybe you can comment. It has this combat rhythm for most enemies where if your weapon is strong enough, you're doing enough damage, which you should be most of the time, you will kind of stun an enemy out of an attack. So you can usually get that first hit in, you know, jump in, swing your sword before you get up close to the enemy, because it takes a second or two to actually swing through and connect. So you'll hit the enemy, they'll be stunned out of their attack, then you back off, you kind of... It's like this dance. You're going forward and backing off, trying to bait the enemy's next attack out of them. Once you see that attack animation start, you back up because you can't really block in this game. You can't, there's no dodge roll or anything like that. So you get shields, you can equip shields, but they just add to your armor rating. It's not like holding up a shield and blocking it. So you always have to bait out those attacks. And then once you see that animation, you jump back, you let the animation play out, then you run in, you get your next swing. And it's this, it's best described as like fencers going, at each other, one step back off like that, trying to get the other person to commit to what they're doing. It's what you're doing with most of the enemies in this game. And it sets up this really unique combat rhythm in this.
Yeah, and there are multiple teaching enemies for that stuff too. Like I'm thinking of those skeletons, for example, in that graveyard. And those are sort of like the first enemies that'll immediately teach you that you can't spam attacks, you can't stay in one place, because they are juking all over the place. There are multiple of them at once. And I remember totally, like, it was those skeletons that I think that's where I'd really got into the groove, of the game, for sure.
Yeah. And those, there's another enemy near the beginning of the game. There's these giant pill bugs that they're teaching you to get behind enemies and hit weak points, because you shouldn't attack their face, because they can hurt you pretty badly, but if you circle around behind them, they can't really hurt you at all. So it's kind of teaching you that circle strafing and trying to get behind enemies as much as you can, which will come in handy much, much later. So I do think they do a pretty good job of teaching you the optimal fighting strategy in the game. Some of the stuff is up to you to figure out, like the fact that if your stamina is not 100% full, you're going to do either no damage or just like shit for damage. We talked about healing. We talked about magic. There are those healing flasks, but you also get these like healing herbs, just like demon souls, these consumable things. They're not very expensive. And during the like first half of the game, I would say, before I could heal using magic predominantly, I would spend most of my money just stocking up on these healing herbs, and that got me through a lot of stuff.
Yeah, with magic, there's really cool variety in magic spells as well. And I said, like, when you level them up, they give you all these like cool extra side effects. Did you have any specific magic you lean towards? Like, I know you said Earth Heal. Earth Heal's really cool, obviously. But
I used Earth Heal, basically the entire game. Earth Heal was my most common spell, which I assume it would be the same for most people playing. It's like, I'm not sure how you like reliably heal a ton without using that. My favorite offensive spell was the kind of like lightning. I forget what it's called, but it's like a lightning sphere. You can shoot it and it will like pass through enemies. So if you have a room,
lightning, I think. Yeah.
If you have like a hallway full of skeletons, you can shoot it and it will pass through and damage like anything in the path for a while. And I leveled that like all the way up to the top level because I used it so much.
Yeah, and I remember using the fire version of that, the firewall, which just does like the big sort of like chaos firestorm kind of thing in Dark Souls. Like just puts out a big firewall. And yeah, the higher levels, it just kind of lingers flame for a while, so it's like really cool for bosses and everything. And then like the classic Kingsfield spell is wind, with the wind cutter, which is a mainstay in I think all the Kingsfield, and in generally a very high utility spell for like, basic combat, just a single wind blade, and it's generally useful for most of the enemies in the game. And it's also good for groups because like it'll pass through targets and so
This is part of me as a gamer. Like once I find a spell that I like, I really don't experiment with everything that I pick up. So I found that like electricity sphere or like light sphere or whatever it's called, spell that I really, really liked. And I just used that the entire game because it was really effective. And by the higher levels, it was real strong. Yeah, by the higher levels.
In this game, that's what you want to do, right? Like because that's how you level up spells is by using them. Right. So it's your build.
You don't want to get to the end of the game with like 15 spells that you love, but they're all at level 1. It's better to have 2 that you really like that are fully leveled up. Yeah. So, finishing out combat, it's wouldn't be an episode of Tales from the Backlog about an action game without talking about the bosses And if I have one like big criticism for Kingsfield 4, it's that I think the bosses are, at best, they're fine. I think a lot of them are really bad. And it's just, I think the combat system is so, like, the combat system really sings when you're fighting, like, just dudes in a hallway, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you come up against a boss, that a lot of the bosses are, like, much, much faster than regular enemies, or their attacks just hit really, really hard, especially in the first half of the game. I can't really think of a boss that I enjoyed fighting, except for the last boss, which we'll talk about in the spoiler section. What I ended up doing was just tanking a lot, and, you know, they hit me, I heal immediately. They hit me, I use one of my healing herbs immediately. A couple of bosses are set up in a way where you can like open the door to their boss room, but you can leave. You're not locked in the boss arena like you are in Dark Souls. So like I would like shoot an arrow at a boss, and then back out. They're going to shoot a spell through the doorway, and then I'll go back in the doorway, shoot another arrow. And like, you know, I'm not fighting them straight up. I don't feel bad about that. Some of these bosses are really hard, and I wasn't particularly having fun, because they kill you. Some of them can just kill you in one hit or two hits. And so I don't feel bad for cheesing some of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and absolutely do it. And let's not put it in small words. I mean, they're not just like hard. Most of the bosses are bad in this game. Honestly, they're just bad bosses. And like, here's another like hot take, I think, from me. You know, this is especially true of older games too, but I think it applies to a lot of newer games. It applies to some of the Souls games too, I think. Video games, man, like they really shoot themselves in the foot with like requiring bosses, or like making bosses be like, sort of showstoppers or like bottle stops. You know, like, why? Like, you know, how many games can you think of where someone would say this, you know, man, this game is good, but like the bosses are like, you know, some of the bosses could be, you know, better or whatever. Like, why have bosses, you know? Like, you know, I especially think about this game, and like, this game would have been perfectly fine with having
no bosses.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or like having those optional, like cool encounters, but like letting you go around them, or like, you know, having like interesting ways to take them out or whatever. Like, you know, this game could have used a lot of gimmick bosses, I think, honestly. And like, you know, people bemoan that stuff in like modern games, but like, I don't know, like, you know, video games, like, stop worrying about bosses. I think, you know, you can do a lot of cool things, but if you let go of this notion that you have to have these like big set piece, like lesson or hard encounters, and, you know, as you said, like there are a couple of good ones, like, you know, as I said, that, you know, there's somewhat, you know, good ones. I think there's a Proto Artorias, which is, I personally like. There's one like near the end of the game I'm going to talk about, that's like, I think, designed a cool way that takes advantage of the systems well. But like most of the time, just use your crossbow or your spells and just spam that shit and move on, you know?
Yeah. Keep your distance, use your crossbow, shoot spells.
Yeah.
Whenever you get hit, like the game pauses when you go into the menu. So it's one of those things where when you get hit, you can just pause, pop one of those healing herbs, kind of back off and make, because I think the healing herbs heal over time. It's a short time, but I think they heal over time. So, you know, eat one of those healing herbs, back off for a second, let it heal, or use your magic spell that heals you instantly. And it just becomes like it's not really a test of skill anymore. It's just a test of like, do I have enough magic, or do I have enough crossbow bolts and stuff like that to make it through? Yeah, I agree.
It's a bit of a survival horror like design sensibility. Like, you know, it's doing an inventory check on you. Like, you know, do you have enough things that you can use to take this thing down? You know. Yeah. We're gonna tax some of your equipment or some of the things on you before you move on. Things like that. You know.
Yeah, this is something that I've brought up on the show several times, and like most often it's because I want to talk about a game that has bosses that are good. Because that's not the standard. I think that the average game has average or bad boss fights. Right. So like when we do have a game on the show that has great boss fights, I always make a point to point out like, hey, these are awesome. Mm-hmm. Like I recently recorded an episode about Blasphemous, which I think has great boss fights.
Yes.
But Kingsfield where, these are, I can't really compare it to games of the era because I didn't, like I said, I didn't have a PS2. This era in time, I was mostly playing Madden or Morrowind, which also doesn't have great boss fights, but that's because Morrowind doesn't have great combat in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kingsfield bosses, Kingsfield 4 at least, mostly bad. Some of them are fine. Some of them are cool spectacles, but
Yes.
like I can't really think of one where I was like, that was cool, or like that was fun to fight. It was mostly like, that's a cool design, but that was a horrible, cheese fest for me to just try and get through it so I can get to exploring the levels, which I think is like, well, similar to like Souls and Bloodborne and stuff. Like my joy in those games is not really fighting the bosses, even though they're much better in the later games. Exploring the levels is the joy for me. And it was absolutely no different in Kingsfield 4. I loved exploring these levels. Loved it.
Yeah, and some people say like, some of the Souls games have like the best gallery of bosses and things like that, but like it's also true for all of the Souls games that the average Souls boss is a tax. It's a time tax most of the time, right? Like there are standouts, obviously some great ones, but like most of the time it's like, man, it's just a thing that's got to be in the game, so I'm gonna get past it. So, I do like it best when they like are integrated into the story. They're like giving you a big moment in the game or like telling you something cool with that experience. Some of the modern games do that well, but like, man, like if a boss feels like an obligation to me, like, they put it there because like they wanted to pad out the length, I think that's when it's kind of bad. Regardless of like how hard I find it or whatever, like, the hard or easiness doesn't mean much to me. More like it's like, well, am I doing something cool with this? Like I'm just shooting arrows, like,
yeah. Or is it testing something that you've learned like throughout that level? We did an episode recently on the show about Death's Door, which I think has really good boss fights because they're mostly testing stuff that you learned in that particular level. And they're just executed really, really well. And there's only like, 6 bosses in that whole game. There's a lot more in Kingsfield, and they're not really testing anything except like, do I have 75 health herbs, and do I have a full, stock of crossbow bolts, and did I figure out a way to stay far away from this boss so I can keep shooting,
Right.
Not great.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
Yeah. But like I said, the joy for Kingsfield 4 is in exploration, which is like, it's by far where you're going to spend most of your time is exploring levels. And we kind of talked about it before, but like the reason that exploration is good is because, like you said, Mystic, the levels are a bit asymmetrical. Like it's not like, door on the left, door on the right. They both have a turn. Then they turn, north, and then they meet back at the other side. That happens sometimes, but not all the time. So you always feel like you're poking into darkness. You don't know exactly what's ahead of you. The invisible doors are always cool to find, but what makes exploration good in a game like this, as opposed to like Breath of the Wild, where exploration, the joy is in like exploring and moving and stuff like that. In this game, you find great treasure everywhere.
Yes.
And not just weapons and armor. Consumables are really, really useful in this game. So like anytime I found one of those mushrooms that refills your magic, I was like, fuck yes, I needed some mushrooms. This is awesome. Like it's great. They really handle your rewards for exploring really well.
Yeah, and I do want to call out the pause screen, honestly. Like, so finding cool armor, right? Like in modern Souls games, it's like, you have fashion Souls, right? Like you find something and you're excited because it looks good, or like it has a cool piece of lore on it or whatever. And, there is some, very brief descriptions on things here, and like there's the journal and stuff like that. But like, I do want to call it the pause screen, but because I do kind of like how that weird disembodied figure.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like playing dollhouse or whatever, like dressing up that weird disembodied figure and like these like cool like trinkets and artifacts that you find. I kind of like it. I found it very charming, and like anytime I found like a new chess piece or like something cool, like it just like it felt so cohesive, like like this place seems important, so it had something important, and like as you said, like finding a secret wall always feels good. Making a leap of faith or like doing something daring and cool always leads to something cool. Taking a weird turn, just questioning, like, hey, what could there be, or around that corner, or like over that edge, and there's always something. I mean, most of the times there's something cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you said, the consumables are obviously very helpful and cool to find, but like even things like armor and weapons, like more than just the utilitarian aspect of like increasing your damage or your levels or whatever. It was nice to like look at these like sort of retro designed armor, or like like I remember the coolest armor that you find, like I think the Muse armor, like you can find like different pieces of it around the end. My disembodied guy in the pause screen looked super cool by the end. By the time I found everything and equipped everything, it's like, man, this is kind of like proto Fashion Souls. It felt good. It felt good to me.
It definitely is. Yeah, for sure. Another thing you can find when you're exploring is the merchants in this game are mostly hidden. Like
all the NPCs and merchants, yeah.
You're never really this happens sometimes, but like so at the very beginning of the game, you go into the first area, the city ruins, and there's an actual shop that has a sign, and it says like I actually think the guy's name is
David Bunch.
Yeah, which was weird for me.
You don't know this. Oh, that's right. I don't know if you knew this story, by the way, but like ASCIIware, which is Edutech, I think later on, when they released the I guess the Western version of this game, there was a very popular Kingsfield fan website on the internet for a long time. I'm blanking on the name right now. I don't think it's Sword of Moonlight, which is the actual like modding engine website for Kingsfield, but like there was another Kingsfield fan website, and before this game came out, there was a lot of chatter on there, and so a lot of the NPC names are actually real people that were on that website. Yeah. So there's a David Bunch, there's Chad, there's the Chad,
I was gonna say you're going through this like mystical fantasy kingdom full of skeletons and goblins and stuff like that, and then you meet a dude named Chad, and you're like, okay, interesting.
It is funny. It's kind of like, the funny thing is like they're designed, or like they speak and they present themselves as Souls NPCs. They look forlorn. They speak in tongue. They speak in riddles, and like they are just morose or like weird looking. But then they'll just have names like Dave and Chad, and
yeah, exactly.
It's really cool.
So the point I was getting at there is that like, at the beginning of the game, there's a merchant who has an actual shop, and then you, as far as I remember, you'll never find another shop ever again. There's the blacksmith you'll find who has like a blacksmith forge, but all the other merchants are just like dudes in rooms, and you're like discovering, you're exploring. You open up this random ass room, and there's just like a dude in there, and he's like, "Oh, I sell crossbow bolts, and I'm stuck in this room." And this is my life now, and I'm here. So like, it's kind of it's actually kind of inconvenient, because like there were plenty of times where I was like, I'm out of crossbow bolts, or like I know a boss is coming up, I need to load up. I got to figure out which random room that dude was in order to refill. So that that was kind of inconvenient. But I do think it's funny that like it's actually similar to Souls, where you'll just find a merchant like at the bottom of some random ass staircase, or like in a pot somewhere or something like that.
And I don't know how much of it's true for all the NPCs, but like I did hear that some of them were asked their greatest fears and things like that, and like on the forums on that website, and like someone would say like, I hate spiders or whatever, and so they put that guy, I think the Chad guy, and he had the spiders in the beginning.
Yeah,
so
there's
it's
the the archery dude is in a room full of explosive barrels, and he's like,
yeah.
he says something like, "Oh, I can't move. I'm worried I'll make these things will explode," or something like that. So yeah,
It's funny.
so anyway, it's an interesting reward for exploring, and we've talked about like basically you're always going to be rewarded for exploring. You're either going to find a path to a new level or a shortcut, or you're going to find some cool treasure or something like that. Or you're going to find like a room full of skeletons, and who doesn't love a room full of skeletons?
I love them. And there's some
Yeah.
awesome skeletons in this game. There
There are.
skeleton set pieces.
Yeah.
Just, man, so good. So good.
I took some screenshots while I was playing, like whenever I could, remember to like get into screenshot mode, like while I'm trying to, survive 75 skeletons attacking at the same time. There's a lot of good stuff like that. So we're going to take a little music break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the soundtrack, which we've kind of talked about a little bit before, and visuals and story setup in Kingsfield 4. All right. So as you've been hearing through the episode, you've been hearing some of this very unique Kingsfield 4 music. And like Mystic, you mentioned this earlier in the recording, but like you listened to this outside of the game even before you actually played this game. And I have also listened to this outside of the game, like when I was doing stuff at work, I would just like throw this soundtrack on. Mm-hmm. It's weird. It's this like very foreign, but also somehow like familiar medieval style soundtrack. It has these very unnatural sounding instruments that sound familiar all at the same time. And there's like harpsichords and shit, and like just stuff that you don't normally hear in, definitely not in modern game soundtracks, for sure. But I think it's really cool. I love it.
Yeah, me too. And it's again, I don't know how much of it sounds like hyperbole to the listeners or whatever, but like this is a opinion I've held for a long time. When I used to listen to it.
Do it.
I used to listen to it a lot, right? Like even before playing the game. I think it might be my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. Like, I have a few contenders in there, like Koatani's score for Shadow of the Colossus, like a big standout for me. And, there's a lot of big, I can throw out like a bunch of retro soundtracks that I listen, from time to time. They're not like, again, just like you, I didn't grow up playing a lot of older video games or anything. It's just I'm revisiting them. But something about it, this one though, it feels very primal to me. It feels like it's speaking to me as something that I didn't even know that like my brain and my sensibilities are geared towards it. It's like, it could be a cross-pollination of so much, mixing together in a weird way. Like I love like weird 60s psych rock stuff. I love, when music gets weird, right? Like, I grew up in India, I was born there, and, I do like that sort of Eastern palette of like, the music, Indian music, classical stuff coming from there. But yeah, like something about it, just like the game design sensibilities of FromSoftware, like the East meets West kind of thing. Like I do find that in the soundtrack as well. Obviously, as you said, like there's the dungeon core, like dungeon synth aspects of it. But also like out of nowhere, you'll get like a really funky beat. Like I'm thinking of the one where you first enter the first shop, for example, near the outside ruins, where it goes, there's like it has a super funky beat there. I love it so much. There's just so much experimentation with synthesizers, a lot of like acid jazz stuff, and like some of it, the most famous track from this, I think Dark Reality and like a couple other ones, like they sound like early Radiohead tracks. I think a lot of people might have pointed that out. If you go to the YouTube videos for those tracks, you'll see people saying, "Hey, this sounds like Radiohead" or whatever. So it has that like sort of garage rock sensibilities as well, like just like a dude noodling, and like coming up with like super catchy tunes. I don't know, something about that vibe is like, it's just so warm. It just feels, I don't know, like if I'm like putting it on like during work, like that's the kind of thing I want, like I want that background thing that you can also hum to, but then you can also space out to. You can put it at the back of your head, but then also jump back when some real cool thing comes up in between. Like, yeah, I have like a lot of standouts from this album. Like I love the soundtrack, and I'm actually finding that it's getting a lot of critical reevaluation as well. Like, it's been picked up by a bunch of media outlets. Like people talk about it a lot, and you'll find tons of Souls YouTubers putting out videos that just add Kingsfield 4 soundtrack in the background. Just it's not very uncommon these days. So I think it's getting that reevaluation. Yeah, if you go to YouTube comments for this, you'll find a lot of people being like, "Hey, I came here from so-and-so Souls YouTuber that played it in one of their videos or whatever." And so it's clearly hitting a chord with a lot of people. All props to, the sound designer, Tsukasa Saito. He also made, he was the lead music guy for this, and he had a hand in some of the cooler, like newer FromSoftware tracks, Gurman, a few other tracks as well that I'm thinking of, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really cool soundtrack, and there's a really big like just difference in like the way that it's setting up tone and like atmosphere in different levels. Like I'm thinking of, there's one soundtrack where I think it's like a cave, maybe the mines or something like that, where you are like the sound, it's hardly even music. It sounds like things like yelling in the distance. It's this really high pitched, like droning kind of thing. I can't remember exactly what level that's in, but like you contrast something that's like extremely atmospheric like that with the main city, the tower soundtrack, or like the city ruins soundtrack and stuff like that, which are more, hummable, like you said, more catchy things. I really like it.
So much atmosphere to areas, and as you said earlier, like knowing you're entering an area and associating it with that music is just
exactly
also good. Yeah.
Because everything does connect back to that central tower. Basically everything does. You'll constantly be opening up these doors, and you'll hear that song come back, and you're like, okay, I'm back at the tower. Cool. Yeah. And as far as visuals go, this is hard for me to like talk about objectively, because like I said, I didn't have a PS2. I had an N64 during this time, and then GameCube and stuff like that. But I don't play a lot of older games, and the ones that I do play are normally pixel art games. I don't normally go back to older 3D games like this. That being said, as a PS2 game, I think the visuals are pretty well, as the console would demand. They're pretty minimalistic, low texture, even compared to like the next game, Demon's Souls, which was on PS3, of course. So I had more power working for it. But I actually really like the visual look of this game. I like how each area is, you spend a lot of time indoors in this game, but all of those areas are pretty visually distinct in some way. Like I talked about getting lost and like not having a great sense of direction, but it wasn't because I was like, am I in the Earthfolk area, or am I in the tower, or am I in the, am I in like the, the place where all the spiders are? I was never like confused about where I was. It was always how to get back. And so I think like, even with a really limited, the power of the PS2, they did make these areas visually distinct. I do think the fact that this is like an ancient kingdom that you're going into, it's decrepit. There's not a lot of signs of like life now, Right. You are going into this place that's been cursed and abandoned basically for a long time. So like that kind of barren, level of detail actually works in a good way. It makes it feel old and ancient in a cool way.
Absolutely. And I will definitely, point out some highlights, in the spoiler section for me. Like, I think some things that made like had a big effect on me when I first looked at them or whatever. But like, the dungeon ecology of this game is so good. It's just, I did agree with you back then, like the feeling that the central tower in the vicinity, like, the sort of like absolutely near the center of it, and like when it's branching out, it can feel samey there because it's kind of going for that same tower feeling. But like near the end of the spokes, like, when you get to the Earth Folk area, or like when you get to the refinery, or when you get to, near the end game zones, or like the, the snake area, or whatever, they all have like very unique looks. I think I definitely, again, I'll bring up my favorite ones in the spoiler section, but like, it's so good. And like, it does such a good job of like associating like a creature design with the kind of area it's in a weird way. Like, not that we're looking at walking skeletons or like large bugs every day in our lives, but like, I can kind of sense that a skeleton would be in like the kind of area it's in, or like, a weird night design like would be in the area that's in, or like those forest creatures would be the area that they're in. They do a great job of like, there's you can tell like a lot of work went behind like the creature designs and like the area designs, even with the limited palette that they had. And as I brought it up before, I do think Dark Souls 2, kind of shares like some of that older retro design, and like that's why it kind of maybe felt like to a lot of people that it looked kind of older, or like less refined, I guess, than Dark Souls 1 or whatever. But like I disagree. I think there is a cohesion there. There is something to like the sort of limited palette claustrophobia that they're going for, and as you said, the feeling of visiting the ruins of an ancient city. These are all hypothetical situations, right? Like, these are all like the language of the fantasy genre speaking to us. And like, it's about putting your head in a space where you're immersed. The best video games do that. And I think that this one does that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've made it this far in the podcast without me really using that word, immersion, but like I was fully immersed in like playing this game, and all these things work together. The gameplay, the exploration, the music, and the way that these levels are designed visually all works together to give me this like same magical level of immersion that, I'm very outspoken about how much I love Dark Souls and Bloodborne and the immersion that I get in those games. I got the same thing from this game, and all those things work together to give you that. We are going to take a little music break. You can hear some more of this very varied Kingsfield music. When we come back, we're going to give our final thoughts in summary before spoiler time. Okay, so before we get into spoilers, actually, we need to talk about the story. And the story setup in Kingsfield 4 is kind of similar to Dark Souls. You get an opening cutscene, and then not much else as far as direct storytelling, except for some NPC dialogue. And we mentioned there's like tablets around the world with your stuff. So, Mystic, you want to give the kind of setting setup for the game?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, because I love the game so much, I had spent some time getting into. Over the last few years, I've been like looking at different people's interpretations of it, or like I've watched tons of LPs. I have a couple of recommendations actually. There's a friend of mine on a different community and a YouTuber, Kazadev or Theomany. So she does like a lot of exploration of like these older FromSoftware games, especially she calls them like the Age of Ancients playlists or whatever. way better than me. Like those people on YouTube, like they do much better job than me of like trying to capture like the themes or like what they're going for or whatever. And there's a lot to read into if you want to do it. You know, some of it could be a stretch, but there's generally like a running through line through these older games to like, you know, the modern games, things like that.
Cool. Well, I'll throw those links down in the episode description so that people can check those out if they're interested in getting more into the story than we're going to go into on this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, so to get into the story of this, like honestly, like as you said, like there's vague NPC dialogue, there's weird tablets, there's a journal in the game. And I think this game could be much better at like its proper nouns. And I get what you're talking about earlier, right? Like you read a tablet which says like earth folk or like dark folk and whatever, and it's like there's a very vague descriptions of what's
Right,
happening
yeah.
there, right? Like there is a bit of element of like Herodot is like speaking, you know, about, you know, that his travels are like, you know, different races or whatever, but like so it really fails to capture in a very inspiring or immersive manner as to like what's happening. But yeah, so ultimately what this is a cursed land or like a, you know, a curse falling upon a land. And the repercussions of it, right? So there's an ancient city which is built upon a holy land. Very, very generic adjectives, by the way. Like
Yep.
if you look at that, it's so you know they uncovered an idol of sorrow, which unleashed darkness upon the land. Many ages later, a kingdom of Helidin receives that idol.
Yeah.
And because it's a cursed idol, you know, the ruin encroaches upon their land as well. And the king of Helidin sends out a sword master, Septiego, and an army of soldiers to return the idol to where it came from. But obviously, this is a monkey's paw. This is a cursed idol. Presumably, like the story doesn't say this, but presumably, when the king received the cursed idol, there may have been a period of prosperity or like the monkey's paw nature of it, like they might have got something early on, like a short-term gain, but like clearly like a ruin has fallen upon their kingdom, and that's why they want to return it. Clearly they have to return it to the source where it came from. It doesn't go well for that legion, for Septiego and his legion. We could get in. I don't know if it counts as spoilers, but you actually do end up finding his legion and you know, the remains and stuff like that, or it's what happened to them. There's some cool stuff there to go into. But the beginning of the game is this cutscene, kind of feels like the Legends of Hidden Temple narrator or whatever, talking about this. There's a kind of charming quality to it of like, you know, when you're a kid and like you're being put to sleep telling a story or whatever. It kind of has that quality. Again, feels a lot like the Dark Souls 2 opening to me, like that old lady just spinning a yarn to you, you know? But yeah, at the beginning of the game, you're Septiego's friend. You're the prince of a neighboring kingdom for Helidin called Azalin. You're Prince Devian, and you're the player character. On a stormy night, a masked character arrives at your door and gives you the idol and says, you have to return it. Like, you know, it's on your kingdom now. You're going to get the curse. So the only thing to do is return it. And you take a one-man expedition instead, because if video games have taught us anything, it's that one person can do what a legion of soldiers could not. So, and obviously
exactly.
You have video game powers and you have a save system. So, you know, you're going to beat this. So, you know, that's the story. You know, and there's obviously like that whole Souls nature of like you're visiting the ruined kingdom. You learn about, you know, the different the dungeon ecology, as I talked about, right? Like you learn about these different folk surrounding that kingdom, or like as you go deeper, you kind of find out that this ancient city built upon this holy land is actually not a single civilization, but there's multiple civilizations. And you kind of find some of them in working state, you know, when you visit them. Like, you know, the widow, the snake people come to mind, right? Like they're clearly still active when you're because you in that level especially, it kind of feels like you're encroaching upon them, right? Like they're kind of keeping out, right? So this cursed idol is clearly being kept out of where it was. deeper readings into the story, it's a classic Souls conceit, as I said, of a curse falling upon a land. But to me, you can read more into it. Like, there's violence that was done upon, the Earth folk, for example. The dwarfs who are the forgers and everything, who were kind of clearly turned into stone, or like captured due to what happened when the curse fell upon them. So you can read more into it as in that Souls thing of like, there is a curse or there is a darkness or whatever, but it's never so like light and dark, both sides of the coin thing. There was a rot in place already, there is the most unfortunate in the land were already suffering, there's all of those elements to it. So, and as I said at the beginning, the story of this is kind of disconnected to the first three Kingsfield games. The first three Kingsfield games had their own story. And some people have done, some parallels or like some connections to that, but this is like a completely self-contained story.
So even like what you said here, and we're not even in like story spoilers yet, even what you said there is more than I picked up from the story. I like playing the game, I didn't know my character's name. I watched the opening cutscene, and then I kind of just like, in one ear, out the other. Didn't really internalize a whole lot of it, because it's kind of just like, this booming narrator. There was an ancient land, and the king was given an idol and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I was basically like, okay, like you start the game, the only thing in your inventory is this cursed idol, and then the game is just kind of like pushes you out the door, and they're like, okay, off you go now. And it really wasn't until maybe the very end of the game, and the Wicca Palace had some story that I actually picked up on, like direct story too. Other than that, I didn't pick up on a whole lot, but that's fine. I don't need a whole... I've said it before on the show, especially with games like this that have such strong atmosphere. I just kind of like have fun exploring and just vibe with any flavor text that I get. Any NPC dialogue is just flavor for me, the way that I consume these stories. So, but we did want to give you the story setup before we get into our final thoughts, which now we're going to go into a music break to get into. Okay, we're back, and time for our final thoughts. In summary, if you want to give our kind of distilled opinion about Kingsfield 4 for people listening who maybe haven't played it, or of course those who have, Mystic, we'll start with the guest as always. What would you tell my listeners about Kingsfield 4?
All right, I have suggestions in the order of accessibility. All right?
Okay.
Number one, listen to the soundtrack. It's very easy to do. It's all available online. Just bring up the YouTube playlist to the soundtrack. I think, even if you're not enamored with all of it, you might find a track or two that really speaks to you. It's really, really special. Trust me on this. It's a very special soundtrack. That's the easiest thing to do. Number two, you can watch an LP of it. A lot of cool Souls YouTubers, other like cool people are like doing reevaluations of this game or revisiting it, and like there's a lot of cool content about it coming up on YouTube. Especially over the last couple of years, but there's even some good ones even older than that. Number three, try to get an emulator. It's as you said, there could be some technical problems, setting up everything properly, but it's really not that hard to do. Like, you can definitely get an emulator and play this, and I would totally suggest you maybe check out, the Shadow Tower games too, especially Shadow Tower Abyss, which is, in my opinion, also a very, very special game.
Is that also on PS2, Shadow Tower Abyss?
That one you can only play on an emulator because an official English translation is not available on a disc. I think you can play it on a jailbroken PS2, but yeah.
Okay, that'll be the next PS2 emulator game I'll try out then. I'm definitely going to be in the mood for something that gives me the same feeling for sure.
Yeah, it's a very similar but also very different game. People say King's Field is to Shadow Tower is like Dark Souls is to Bloodborne, in a weird way, in terms of like the creature design, like the kind of cohesive design sensibilities and story it's going for and all that. But yeah, final thoughts, like I wouldn't say it's like a complete recommendation, for everyone, because I can totally see a lot of people running up against like all the, the age of the game, especially, and like the, how hard it can be to get everything running and like going and like the time it can get used to it. But man, like if I was able to speak to like how special this game is to me, like maybe it will be that special to you. Like, like we all love the Souls games, right? Like so many of us do. And I can tell you that a lot of that heart and charm and magic is present in this game. You can totally find it. Trust me on this. Like there are many moments that are very special, but like there are definitely a few moments that will definitely speak out to you if you're a Souls fan.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm with you on maybe listening to the soundtrack first to get a feel, because I think the soundtrack does capture some of that like really unique atmosphere in the game. I am definitely with you that anyone who wants to play this game, I think you should play with an emulator. I mean, unless you have a PS2 sitting around and you can find a copy of the game to play. The just like my own personal experience, like I said, I would not have made it through this game without save states. Full stop. Would not have made it. So I definitely recommend it to be played that way. But like you said, this, and like I've said before too, this game should be something that I would not like because I don't like a lot of older games. And this game does have a pretty high like adjustment period at the beginning, very like abrupt adjustment, especially if you're coming from very, very modern action games. I would liken this to somebody, playing a very heavily modded version of Skyrim and then going back and playing Morrowind for the first time and not knowing what to expect.
That's really accurate.
It's a big adjustment period, but like so I played it, and I got frustrated, put it down a few times, I'll pick it back up. But like I was always thinking about it in the back of my head, and I was always like, there's something pulling me back to this game. And so even through those periods where I was frustrated, or even through those periods where I was like, these bosses are bullshit, there is just I think there is a magical quality to this game that, if it were remade and re-released in 2022, I think it would probably lose some of that magical quality.
I agree.
Just from some of the limitations that it presented. Not saying I wouldn't play a remade version of this, but I do think there is a kind of, a thing that I can't really describe that kept me coming back to it and kept me super immersed in it. And we've done our best to explain why that happened as we've gone through. So I do recommend people play this if you are up for an adjustment. If you know yourself and you're like, I would get frustrated learning a very foreign control scheme and super different combat style. If you know that you'd be frustrated by that, this is probably not the game for you. Just be honest with yourself. Like, there's no shame in saying like, yeah, that doesn't sound like my thing. But if you think you're up for it and you want to get this like very cool exploration and very unique kind of tone and atmosphere in this game, if you love everything FromSoftware has done, in the modern age of gaming, why not try Kingsfield 4 out? I think a lot of people will find something to really like here, just as me and Mystic have been talking about. So, before we get into spoiler time, little housekeeping for the podcast. Before I talk about me, Mystic, do you want to direct people to any social media or anything that you've got going on?
Not too much. I mean, I'm on Twitter, mysticreferee86. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
I'm not really a big internet presence or anything, but I'm on the Duckfeed community. I'm in a few other Souls Discords or whatever, so always have to talk about Souls or whatever. So that's cool.
Okay, right on.
Yep.
Well, for Tales from the Backlog, please remember to subscribe, give ratings and reviews on your platform of choice if it allows it. If it doesn't allow it, just hop on over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. Very much appreciate that. And follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, although I'm not super active on Facebook. The episode description will have links to the social media pages where you can talk to me about the games that are on the episodes, and you can find out what's coming up in the coming month on the show. So we are going to take a break. When we come back, it is spoiler talk for Kingsfield 4. I am back with Mystic, and we are going to talk spoilers for Kingsfield 4. And as you may expect with games like this, like in the Hollow Knight episode, the Dark Souls episode, I don't pick up the story a whole lot, and it's not my job to teach you the story of this game. It's my job to tell you about my experience playing it. So I'm going to base my spoiler section here on my experience playing the game. So the first thing I want to start out with is that I had a great time vibing through the first several levels. You know, the city ruins, the spider cave, the mines, all of that stuff. And I think the first several bosses in the game are horrible. And I singled out the fire demon here as just a really unfair boss, I think. What makes it unfair, I think, is that like you're fighting him one-on-one. He's super powerful. He's probably too strong for you when you first get to that area. Like, I think you're meant to go back later and fight him. That's fine. But what I don't like is that you'll be fighting him and projectiles will come off of like outside of your field of vision and just come hit you in the back while you're trying to fight. And I really hated that fight. I came back, like, basically when I was ready to beat the game, I went back and just beat his ass because I was so like, you know, you're going to get what's coming to you.
Oh, interesting. I'm maybe misremembering this then, because I was going to say, like, maybe it was a designed encounter and it was just shitty. Like, I didn't know. Maybe I'm misremembering which fire demon it is.
It's for sure optional. So it's in that area that has those dragonite looking, you know, dragon monsters, and it has the big fat dude that's blocking the lava.
Right. So this is the refinery, right? So that's the place which has the rule of nature.
But I'm not talking about the big fat thing that's blocking the lava. That fight was like kind of annoying, but it was fine. But like you can go up a path, like a very
that's the guy that adds
walkway.
He has ads, right? He pulls out like other people too with him.
The fire demon dude, the fat guy has ads. Fat, you know, blob thing. But there's like an actual like fire demon, and you you go up this thing, this like long passageway, this winding thing. You cross this really narrow bridge.
Yes,
and then there's like this circular arena.
I remember.
And you fight this fire demon, and I hate that fight. I thought it was awful.
Okay, then I'm just. I totally agree with you. If I'm not even like completely remembering unless you like prodded me that much. It was probably a shitty experience anyway. But like, I don't remember like coming back to beat him, but I think I might have beat him, but I probably cheesed him, you know? And I was thinking of the big lava dude who's also like pretty shitty boss, but I think I ended up cheesing him as well. So
that one was manageable though, because like I used my sword swings to kill his ads, and then I just shot that lightning magic at him from a distance. And like, as long as you're always moving, I didn't think that was too terribly hard. Like the first time I fought it, I was like, this sucks. And then the second time I beat it, I like, well, we said it before, I don't think any of these bosses are great, but it's definitely not horrible. Not as bad as that, you know, that actual like Satan looking demon thing that you fight kind of at the top of that level.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That one, and I think even the run up to that is pretty brutal. Like there's a lot of like enemies in that level that are also hard. But yeah, this projectile fire demon you're talking about, like if he's optional, like I guess I just assumed that he was just another enemy, especially if he wasn't like blocking me. So maybe I just really I didn't probably internalize him as a boss, but I totally agree with you. Like anytime there's like a whole bunch of projectiles that like really run up against your ability to like do a full turn or like properly strafe, like that's the designers like being dicks. I mean, and we know From can do that. Like they've always had a history of like having a boss or two that like really kind of stretches the limits of like challenge or whatever. But I agree, totally. And that spider boss, like the first boss that you find, I'm a little more forgiving of that one because I feel like that one kind of teaches you to use your magic spells because you need the fire spell to fight that guy. So especially because it's so early and you kind of have to get that that trinket to give to the little girl or like that other NPC to get the fire spell. You know, that whole kind of lead up to that thing, teaching you to like, hey, you got the fire spell, use it to get past this that kind of worked for me. But I agree, like the mandatory spider boss, like the weird, you know, strafing that you have to do, which is again a little kind of stretching the limits of challenge there as well. Well, I agree. Yeah.
If you're not already good at the circle strafing, that spider boss is going to teach you how to do it because it's like 100% mandatory. Learn how to circle strafe or that spider's going to kill you like real fast. That spider boss also teaches you how finicky it is to place items because you find that that thing that helps you like heal the spring or like cleanse the spring down the healing fountain or whatever they call it. And you have to place it on the altar where the spider was. But it's one of those things where like, if you're half a degree or half a centimeter too far away, it just won't register that you're trying to put it there. So there's a little, another lesson for you that the game's teaching you. Not in a great way, but you'll learn.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple of set pieces, like I guess early on in the game that like really, you know, early on, like one of the moments that really stuck out for me is I think this is the place where you get the bracelet of clarity or the ring of clarity. Is that little like small village that you enter with the girl that's really sad, whose mother who's sick, whose father is gone. It's just the classic, just soul sad sack story. Like there's a house you enter. And you enter the back door of the house and enter its yard, and the door kind of closes behind you or whatever. And there's this weird ass tree. That just looks
creature back there.
This is like a in place ant or whatever. Just like a super cool set piece. I think watching that at first like kind of gave me a sense of like the creature design, because until then you're kind of just looking at just those pill bugs
and pill bugs
and things like that. So like that first like really striking moment of like, oh yeah, this is my the FromSoftware that I am familiar with. So that was super cool.
It was, yeah. That one definitely like that one definitely gave me a sense of like, it made me think like there's like a mini story here. Like that's maybe part of the curse, like someone was turned into that thing and the family just kind of like locked it back there, you know, like don't open that door. Nobody opens that door. You don't want to see what's back there. Like, this door stays shut forever, you know.
Right. And then you do find that guy in the church who's asking for something, but then you go back and you find out the skeletons have already killed him. That's another classic Soul story. But yeah, I think the father of that family is the one that you find in the mines. That's
he's in the
dead,
mines.
Right?
He's dead, I think.
Yeah, he's dead. Yeah, that's their fate.
Yeah, he's crushed by rocks. And
yeah,
there's another dude in the mines who's just like digging forever, you know?
Yeah. Just like classic Soul stuff. I do love the design of the little poison mushrooms growing out of the bodies that are just that just puff out poison when you get close to them. Very striking enemy design as well.
And those slimes in the mines also poison you, and like poison is such like an emergency when it happens in this game. It's kind of crazy. But
then like I feel like there's maybe a couple times in the game where it's like really challenging, because obviously in the beginning of the game you're really struggling, so poison's a big big enemy. But then it really doesn't become a big deal until you enter the Widow Castle and like those snakes are doing it to you. That snake boss has horrible poison design, but that's everything. But yeah, progressing through like what I'm remembering, one of my favorite moments in the game is like, you know, when you make the first approach to the tower and you're, you know, before you open up the tower fully, you find the area with the xenomorphs and like just like the weird like internal catacomb area with all the xenomorphs. But like really a moment that still sticks out to me, and I remember taking a screenshot and a video of this as well, is like you're climbing up and all these bats come out at you, and like, these xenomorphs are chasing you. You've had a pretty harrowing time, and you're going up this spiral staircase, I think, and like going up, and it feels like you're escaping these things, and like, and you enter the clearing into the forest area. I just, something about that is like, you know, it's just one of those moments, like, again, like if someone has like similar sensibilities as me, like, that's like one of those moments, like it's worth it, you know, if you're playing this game. It's like the way they give you that claustrophobic feeling, but at the same time open it up with such a limited palette, and like it feels like you're actually breathing fresh air when you enter the forest for the first time. Really stuck out to me. And then those mossy stone knights that are, again, very Dark Souls 2-ish, like they look like the Dark Souls 2 giants or whatever.
And those, like the golems that are out there.
The golems. Yeah, sorry, not the knights. But yeah, like them moving away once you unlock them to open the door for you. Just so much about that area was like so magical to me. I think that whole forest, the forest folk introduction, and like you find your proto firekeeper just sitting next to the pool,
the fountain.
Yeah, the water keeper, I guess.
That was cool, because you'd, up until that point, it's either you're outside and it's dark the whole time, or you're inside and it's dark the whole time, and then you come out into the forest and suddenly there's sunlight for the first time in the entire game. That was moment. A cool thing. And you're right, like a total breath of fresh air after what was a pretty tough dungeon, to come out into just such a peaceful, what ends up being like your home base later on through the game, because you have that, you know, that building with the 4 treasure chests you need to get the eyes out of, and one of those warp spots, which ended up being, until I got to that fountain that refills health and magic, like way late in the game, that was my warp back, refill the flasks spot in the forest.
Yep. And because we're in that vicinity, I loved entering the castle, I think, when the golem opens it up, fighting knights, because it felt like Dark Souls to me, fighting those knights. You know, it just had like similar combat patterns as them, like dodging around them. It felt like I was playing Souls, and I think that's when I was like really hooked, because like, oh man, this is all here. Like all the things I love, all his games is all here. And then let's talk about the skeletons, man. Like I fucking love the skeletons in this game. They're so cool. And like my favorite skeleton set piece is probably the guy that rings the gong and like all the skeletons stand up in the room. Oh man,
That
it's so cool.
tanked my frame rate on the emulator when all those skeletons stood up. I was fighting. It was actually pretty my computer is not very powerful, so this happened to me often actually. Like frame rate would slow down to like what I assume is like 30, no, not 30, like 20 and below, where things are moving in super slow motion. And so it actually kind of helped plan like what I'm going to do. But when all those skeletons in that like that burial chamber or wherever they are, when all of them came up, my frame rate like plummeted down. And it was
Wow.
like super super slow motion. Like
Oh,
someone actually hit a slow motion effect on the emulator when that happened.
I hope that didn't like completely ruin the moment or something for you, because that for me it was like so cool. And it was, I remember, I forget how I beat them, but it was challenging, but it was just a cool moment. Yeah.
It didn't ruin the moment for sure, but it definitely like they all came up, but like when they start attacking and stuff is when the frame rate started to go down. And I think I beat them just by like the same way I always do when I have a bunch of enemies. Try to like aggro them one at a time. But the problem with those is I think a lot of those skeletons were archers. So I kept my distance, used that, light ball spell to kill as many of them as I could. And I eventually got through it. I remember that one because that was frustrating because there's a key item in that room in the back. There's like, it might actually be a key. And I like just missed it. The game's not super great at like letting you know where a key item might be. Like this is just literally like sitting there, or it's like in a coffin. I can't remember, but like there's like 40 coffins in that room.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was a point where like I was glad I was playing with a guide because I probably would have, just skipped right past that key,
Yeah, I suppose like the initial moment of like the set piece revealing itself is way cooler than the actual tedium of like clearing them out and like doing the search through things or whatever. But still, I think I'll give it to the game for giving me that moment, I guess. Yeah.
Actually,
yeah.
You know what? Don't all those skeletons die if you hit that bell again?
Yes, they do. They do.
So I think that's how I did it. Like I think the guide probably told me if you hit the bell, they all die. So I may have cheated my way past that, but that is cool that that's how you can get past that.
But maybe I'm misremembering. When you do go to the coffins in the back, I think there are some that will still harass you, I believe.
Oh, there's like 15 more skeletons in that back room.
yes. Either way, you're gonna get skeleton ganked.
Yeah.
But
if you like skeletons, Kingsfield 4 is a game that you have to play because there are skeletons aplenty in this game.
Side note: FromSoftware used to release these like PlayStation demo discs, and I'll try to find the screenshot later. But like, there's one where they're like talking about the power of the PlayStation or whatever. And it's like, in every frame, they're just showing off skeletons. Basically, they're just like, look at all our cool skeletons we've rendered in this new hardware or whatever. They love skeletons. Yeah. Anyway,
if I would have seen that, I would have bought a PlayStation.
Right.
But next level that I want to talk about is it's the Ocean Fort, and I think I'm skipping a pretty significant chunk of like the middle of the game, but I don't remember a whole lot. And the Ocean Fort stood out to me because it's the Proto Sens Fortress. It is a fortress. It's like a ocean fortress, but full of traps. Collapsing floors. One trap in particular that gave me a chuckle is the collapsing floor that dumps you into a pool full of piranhas.
Yes.
Made me laugh, like a very, very like, okay, FromSoft, you got me. Very good. Props to you. But lots of arrow traps and stuff like that too. There's that one puzzle where you're trying to, there's this room that has like 7 treasure chests in it, and the floor will collapse under you if you're not careful.
Yeah, like
so
totally. Yeah. It is Proto Sens Fortress, but I also do love like the approach to it as well. Like I think when you first enter like the ocean side area, like you just see the lighthouse and this sort of fort in the middle of the ocean. It's just such a cool vibe. Again, like when the game does so much with its palette that like even though it's putting you in those claustrophobic spaces, like it does it to such good effect that when it does open up, it feels so much more striking for sure. Oceanford's like a fantastic example of that. But like as an example of one of my favorite like sort of claustrophobic stretches, the whole like Earthfolk area, like the refinery especially, where you fight the Ice Knights, and then you have to do all that puzzle, I guess, go into the fire area, like balance it out. There's like real funny tablets there. It's like they're just saying very obvious things such as like fire melts ice or whatever. They're not really telling you anything great, but I do love the sort of balancing out the thing there, and like fighting the Ice Knights. We've already talked about like their cool hurricane kick styles. I really love that stretch. So that's cool for sure.
It is good. And I remember, like, I was glad I was playing with a guide, because one of the best weapons in the game before you get the Moonlight Sword is you just find it like on the beach, like on the coastline next to the save point right outside that Proto-Sen's fortress area.
It's called the Tsunami, right? That weapon?
Yeah, and it's you can't even really see it. It's just you just have to like point your camera at the ground and then press A a bunch of times, and eventually you'll pick it up when you hit the right tile. And it's very weird, but if you were to find that naturally, it would be the coolest thing because it's such a good weapon. But I was glad I was using a guide, because I wouldn't think to do that,
For sure.
Yeah. But you mentioned the Wida castle earlier, and this is one of the coolest parts of the game, because this is like story that I actually pick up on, and it's like cool, like dark, dangerous, magical story too. So like this is the snake heaven, and like we said, Proto-Sen's fortress. These are the snake enemies that are in Sen's fortress.
They are
right here,
just the same ones, pretty much.
Yeah. And like comparing side by side, I'm sure the resolution is higher in Dark Souls, but like it's the same model.
Yeah.
As far as I know. And this one has like this story where they're like turning people into snakes. They're like capturing people from this expedition and they're turning them into snakes, and you get to like talk to the NPC that's in charge of this in there. And that was pretty cool.
And that's where you find like the sort of unceremonious end to Septiego, like the guy that originally led the Legion.
The sword master.
I was totally like, when playing the game, I was like totally like that guy's going to be a boss or something later on, but no, it's just he just died. And there's that funny NPC. I think I forget his name, but he had like pretty generic name as well. But like his
name's like Bill or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And like he's like, I don't know, there's like some fat jokes or whatever, I guess. Like the guy's just like loves eating or something. And I do remember it is a cool little like neat, concise short story, as you said.
That other guy, the guy that's in like that like barricaded camp area, who
he's
like,
part of the contingent that got trapped in there. But he's like,
and you go and talk to him earlier in the game, and there's another guy in there with him. And then you go back later, and it's like very strongly hinted that he ate the other guy that was in there with him.
Yeah, and I think there's a very like minor touch you might not pick up on, but like once that quest finishes, if you peek through the room, you can kind of see that he has like a sneaky looking tongue coming out. So there's that whole transformation, I guess, storyline or whatever. Like I do remember like you end the story by giving him a Wida egg or something. So
he gives you a crystal flask, I think.
Yeah, so there's some weird shit going on there. Like he's definitely turning into a Wida or something. But yeah, like it's like a funny little aside there. But yeah, it's a neat little short story. And then there's that cool thing of like you having to don the disguise of the Wida to enter, even like because you can't get through. You can get through the fire, I think, if you put on enough defense. But the easiest way to do it is by wearing their equipment, which also gives you like really cool bonuses.
And also fashion oriented if you want to wear cool snake armor.
For sure. Great area.
You mentioned before the boss in that Wida area, and I agree. There's two, right? There's, if I'm remembering right,
there's a double snake boss, and then there's the sort of like the queen of the Wida or whatever.
Yeah. So the double snake was pretty easy, I thought, because I had a bunch of antidotes, so if it poisoned me, it didn't matter. The queen, I just cheesed from shooting arrows like at the end of the hallway. Like,
Right.
I'm sure if you went up in the room to fight, it would have been really hard, but I saw her and I could like, you played the game for long enough at this point, like you see the boss in this room at the end of a hallway and you're like, oh, I'm not going in there. I'm just going to shoot arrows from the end of the hallway.
Yes. Oh yeah, they're just terrible. I think I remember the double snakes being like worse, I think, than the queen itself.
Yeah.
But
for some reason, I didn't have a ton of trouble with the double snakes, but like I definitely get how it could be really frustrating.
yeah, I think maybe I was trying to use a crossbow instead of magic. I forget, but I just remember being frustrated and just wanted to get over with, because like I really want to say like something I missed saying earlier is like this mid to late game stretch. I love it so much. I think there's just a cool set of areas one after the other. Just starting from like, I love the refinery, obviously, like, as I said, like I found it cool, at least. Like, there's a lot of cool secrets in there. Like you can do cool stuff, but like it opens up into the Oceanside area, and then you get the Witta Castle, and then, just right after the Witta Castle, you get the mine cart area, which I love. I can totally see someone getting frustrated in that area, but I love the
that area was super weird, but I enjoyed it.
I can see I just love that conceit of you sitting in a mine cart and traveling through it. It just becomes a completely different game for a bit. Again, a lot of cool secrets there. I was just having so much fun in that mid to late game stretch. Great things to say about an old game. In that it sort of kept getting better in the latter section. It definitely has its hardest and like toughest parts in the beginning, I feel.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The refinery onward, basically up through like the Passage of Light, I thought is like just all around like really excellent, really fun. The Passage of Light, I didn't think the Passage of Light was really fun, but it's so visually striking, and the music in there
There's nothing like it.
So stressful.
Yeah.
Like the music puts so much pressure on you, even though like it's not really hard. There's just like some, little wyvern dudes flying around or something like that. And then you have to go in these areas and you have to fight these, those knights. They have like 4 arms or something like that. Am I remembering that right?
Yes, the 4-armed knights that you have to find in each of those big rooms in there.
So it's not really hard, but like the visuals of it is like so different from everything else in the game, and the music is. I'll cut it in right here so people who are listening maybe don't remember, or like just listening because maybe you're not going to play the game. Like the music is wild, and it just puts this pressure on you that is kind of cool.
Yeah, and that's what I meant earlier when like the soundtrack kind of is very diverse, because like this one really does feel like a garage rock, like Kingsfield's version of like a real fast thrash metal song or whatever. It's like it's so jarring, like when you first enter it, and like it's metal, like it's absolutely metal. I think it's one of the coolest things that happens in the game, and like and unlike anything I've seen in terms of its sensibilities, like there is a bit of like jarring visual effect, like there's a lot of flashiness, which I can maybe see some people getting frustrated by, but like I think it's like not too overbearing. I think I'm thankful that it's not a super long area. At least I think there's just like a couple of rooms maybe that you just have to get some treasures in and fight those 4-armed knights, but in terms of aesthetic, it's just got so much going for it. It's just such a cool little section.
And I went into the Passage of Light like earlier in the game, like way too early. Because it's connected to like a really kind of early game area. And so like you can step outside and immediately the music just and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I should be out here right now. This feels tough.
Very cathartic. Yeah.
I think maybe one of those things like hit me once and took down like almost all of my health, and I was like, yes, come back later for this place. So
yeah, and the Passage of Light is in the King's Throne kind of area. It's like it's near that other door where it asks you to prove your kingly or something.
Yeah,
that's where it's like one of those, like as you said, early game areas. That's also a late game area, like classic Souls thing. But yeah, it's a lot of cool set pieces there. Before we can get to the Moonlight Sword moment, but like there's that other room there, I think right around the corner somewhere, where like you have all these like ice kind of following you. I don't know if you remember that. There's like a whole bunch of statues with like a single eye on each of them, and like you're walking through the room and they're all following you, and you basically have to hit them all to like solve that puzzle or whatever. Just like a really cool visual, like striking set piece. And then there's that other area where I think all these corpses are on the ceiling, kind of wrapped up in a web or like something. And you kind of have to look up to the ceiling to like get some treasure, because it'll drop down or whatever. I don't know if you got that, but
I don't think I even saw that, because I feel like I would remember if I saw that.
Might be a secret little room or whatever. But again, like there's the concentration there in that near the King's Throne or like the castle area where like there's just a lot of visual set pieces for sure.
Yeah, and there's also that boss that you fight there that will just infinitely respawn skeletons. And
yes,
is that the door that asks like to prove your kingliness?
Yes,
and that,
I think it
that
is.
boss is behind it.
Yes, and totally, and that's literally near the area where we got the Moonlight Sword, right?
Yeah. Well, I saw this happens when I was like looking up like, Kingsfield builds or like strategy guides. And I saw a bunch of people saying stuff like, if you want to, cheese the game and make it easier for yourself, all you have to do is fight this infinite skeleton boss for like 5 straight hours, and then you'll be set for the rest of the game. And I was like, why would you do that? Like, you don't need to, you don't need to fight him for 5 straight hours.
And as I said, the speedrun strategy is to like just fight things with fists early on. So your fists are fists of glory for the rest of the game. So there's a lot of places to cheese things. But yeah, anytime anything is...
It was presented as like this pro gamer strategy where it was like, you want to level up easy. The easy way, the quick way to level up in Kingsfield 4 is fight the infinite respawning boss like for 7 hours in a row. And I was like, that's not easy. That's not, that's the opposite of quick and easy level up strategies.
Right. Side note, I love these old game facts when you look them up. Like, it's so much of it is like the guy writing the game facts bringing his personality to the table. It's like them like telling a little story or whatever. And like, you'll find like different people swearing that their strategy is the best or whatever for some of these older games. And there's no way to, back then, I guess there was no way to verify whether it's actually the right strat. It's just this guy is sitting down. Writing his opinion. This person is the authority on Kingsfield because they wrote a full 50,000 word game facts guide about the game. So they are the authority. I'm happy they did. I'm very grateful to them either way.
Oh yeah. Anytime you play one of these older games, like without question, there will always be someone who poured a lot of time into a long ass game facts guide about it. So props to them. I definitely used one of those or 2 of them for this game. So let's get into like the home stretch here. So you find a staple of the Soulsborne series, the Moonlight Sword, which in the other games is always like an optional thing that I've never used because even if my build was right for it, I was always like much more comfortable with another weapon. Like thinking of my most recent Bloodborne run, I was doing a strength arcane build, but by the time I got that, I was like just very comfortable with my other weapons, so I never used it. But in this game, it's awesome. The Moonlight Sword is great, and you should like equip it immediately.
Yeah, and it's such a moment, and it's again and this is true of all the Kingsfields. it's not just a staple in these games, but it's actually like low relevant and actually an important thing that you need. To get into the story related things here, like you create the Moonlight Sword by using the sword that you find on Septiego's body in the Wita Castle. So it's an important sword, and it kind of tells you something that, you need the Moonlight Sword to kind of unlock the late game stretch. So in a weird way, like if you want to read, too much into the story here, it's kind of weird that the king had something that could have returned the idol back, to its original place, but it's this, but it's the snake civilization or the Wita people that kind of kept out Septiego and his band of people. So it kind of tells you that they didn't want the curse of the idol of sorrow back, back to where it was, because they know that it brings them ruin, and maybe that's why it was originally even sent out. So it kind of maybe makes you question the motivations of like the ancient city to start with. Is like, this curse actually performed a violence on like all these other civilizations when it was present, and that's why they wanted to get rid of it or whatever. So so it's interesting stuff. So but yeah, like it's a really cool moment when you get it, and I guess I expected a Moonlight Sword to be present, but I didn't expect I was going to get it when I entered that room. But like when you slowly walk up all those routes and then insert the sword, and I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be the Moonlight Sword. I can feel it.
Yeah, it is a cool moment, and kind of felt like in a game that doesn't really have cutscenes, it felt like a very like in a much later game, this would have been like a very produced cutscene. You put the sword in, it gets blessed by this holy light, and then you pull out the Moonlight Sword, and you're like, all right, let's go.
Yeah. Really cool. And I want to quickly bring up one more area in the final stretch that I really love. So there's like the little graveyard, I think, that you unlock near the end, and you get to before you get to the flooded area, which is cool as well. Like, it's a little frustrating to manage your breathing or whatever in there, but you find cool armor in there and all that. I do love exploring the base of the tower with the water and like changing the water level and kind of seeing the absolute zenith, I guess, of of that area. But like the other area that really sticks out to me is the Mansion of Howling Winds. I think that's what it's called in the soundtrack, at least, because that might be my favorite track on the soundtrack. It keeps changing because I listen to the soundtrack a lot. But Mansion of the Howling Winds is just so peaceful. I just really love that composition. But
it's really peaceful as long as you're not getting blown off of those bridges by those gusts of wind.
Yeah, and then those weird like rock trolls or something outside that.
Yeah.
But I do love that stretch inside where you find the guy encased in stone, Serac Rizmalk. So you find out
that's the. Yeah.
You find out that he's like one of the main, I guess, proto, whatever you call it. Well, he's like a scientist who invented the atomic bomb, and that he's the one that actually, unlocked the Idol of Sorrow, I guess, in the first place or whatever. He has a hand in uncovering the idol in the first place. Like, so he talks about himself as an archivist or an archaeologist, and like he's like, we didn't know what we were doing, kind of thing. And as penance, he's like turned into stone, and it's never really clear what did this or why that happened or whatever. But like, there's a little cool stretch inside that little house or a mansion. I really like that.
Yeah, that was cool, and that was the one thing I took out of that was like how this guy is basically like accepting the responsibility for it, taking the blame for it, and like he's punishing himself by like committing to like, just leave me here. This is my fate. This is my punishment,
Yeah.
So
yeah. And then finally before like the last area, I guess what I want to talk about, the one boss fight I kind of did like, even though it was challenging, is the prison area. When you get into the final stretch, absolute like last moments of the game before you do the the big moment we could talk about. There's that prison section where those
Yeah.
dogs are chasing you through both the levels, whatever. But
Oh,
then,
yeah, right.
yeah, the boss that you find in that area, I do think is kind of like a proto Artorias in that that's the enemy I was talking about, where like they kind of play with your stamina system and uh, uh, your swerving and like strafing mechanics, where he like does like a lot of cool like sword swipes, multi attacks. He's like way faster than anything you've fought. Again, evoking that Artorias feeling of like really giving you that cool one-on-one duel. I remember having a good time with it. I don't know if you did, but that one stuck out to me.
Yeah, I do remember actually like kind of enjoying that. I think I beat him on my first try because I
Yeah,
was like
he's not
very
like particularly hard, but yeah.
yeah, and like by that point in the game, you have a certain level of mastery on the combat system. Yeah, I do remember that being pretty cool. Like I wouldn't say it's like a good, boss by modern standards, but it was pretty cool. Yeah. So, moving into like the final area of the game, past the graveyard or the battlefield with all the dragon skeletons, that was kind of cool visually, but I actually didn't like being in that level. I just kind of made a mad dash through it. So after you put the idol on this pedestal where it's supposed to be, you are kind of swallowed up, and you go inside of you're inside of a living creature. You see like the walls are fleshy. It really reminded me of Jabu Jabu's belly in Ocarina of Time. Like almost that same level of like living, breathing walls and floors and ceilings.
The guide calls the boss Uvula of the Dark One.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so that might actually be similar to what you're doing in Jabu Jabu's belly in Ocarina of Time. I know you're smacking like things that look like uvulas and stuff like that. So this is where that King's map really came in handy. I'm glad that like I used a guide that told me to pull out the King's map because it's actually useful, unlike the other maps. But there were a lot of enemies in there, but they weren't really that hard. But what I want to talk about is the final boss fight, which is like a Bed of Chaos or a Zelda boss or something. So it's actually like, if anyone's listening and you haven't played, it's this big arena, and instead of actually like fighting a creature, a monster, or a person or something like that, it's like a Zelda thing where you're in this arena. There's a bunch of enemies in the arena. You basically have to just sprint through, and you have to run up these ramps and get to the bosses. Looks like a uvula or something like that.
Right.
And you have to hit it. Once you hit it, the floor collapses. You fall down. You have to run up and do it 2 more times and smack it. I think I got lucky. Like there was a glitch or something. The second time I hit it, the floor fell away, but I was like standing in a part where I just stayed up there. So I just smacked it again and the game ended. But it's really odd that's like the final boss. You are inside of this like, great evil, greater than, just fighting an undead lord or something like that,
Absolutely.
You're inside of a monster.
Yeah, and I feel like this is a trope of older games, and like especially true of the Kingsfield games. If you look at the final bosses of Kingsfield stuff too, is like all of the melting walls around you and like weird bursts of color everywhere. They do want to give you that acid trip kind of feeling, like right at the end, like everything's so psychedelic. We're putting all our colors in here or whatever. I remember being slightly underwhelmed by this. I remember maybe I didn't have as easy a time as you. Maybe I got unlucky or something. I rember being...
I died a lot. Yeah. Like
I remember being a bit of a tedium.
Lucky I was playing with save states because I died, at least 5 times in this fight.
For sure. And it's just... I remember it being like pretty easy with the Moonlight Sword. Yeah, you're right. It's coming back to me. Yes, you do have to run up. You have to hit it, fall down, run up the ramps. Yeah, do that a few times and you're successful. But there's just a lot going on otherwise. So yeah,
there's a lot of enemies. Yeah.
Yeah. So for sure, that definitely is like a King's Field-y final boss for sure. I mean, I think the first game has like Seath as your final boss actually.
Okay.
Yeah, the enemy you fight at the end is called Seath, and I remember it being like this very similar sort of overwhelming arena, or just in terms of design aesthetics, everything being it does feel like paint being splashed on a wall design aesthetic a little bit. Mm-hmm. Just kind of overwhelming you. It's like trying to do like something similar to like Passage of Light, but like all around you or whatever,
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's odd that this is like what the final boss is, but like in the story, you're trying to destroy this immense source of evil, so it kind of makes sense that you're not just fighting Ganondorf.
Right.
It's like you're fighting something much bigger, much more powerful, much more cosmic even than that. So it is cool, but like, and actually now that I'm thinking about it, had they designed like a super challenging like knight type enemy to fight as the final boss, it probably would have been too hard and it probably would have sucked. So now that I'm talking my way through this, it's thematically cool, it's visually cool, and it's also probably the right decision for the game to end with a boss like this.
Yeah, and good sort of touch point on like bringing up Bed of Chaos, because like I think it's like a very similar sort of like if you're looking into the deeper story, the rot that fell upon the civilization kind of being, beneath, everything in the ancient city. It's like that sort of, I do feel like that it's an intentional thing of like everything being, having to go to the bottom of where everything started sort of thing. And I do think like the fact that you find, some of the enemies and like warped knights or whatever, even the surrounding area, I believe it kind of has like that encroaching darkness feeling. Of very similar to Bed of Chaos, of all those roots are kind of coming out of there, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think this boss is better than the Bed of Chaos, though, which is
right.
Interesting because this game is 10 years older than Dark Souls, but I think this is a much better fight than Bed of Chaos.
Good. That's why I said it's a good touch point, because it's making me think about that now too, and you might absolutely be right there.
Yeah, and then after you beat the final boss, you get kind of a jarring, happy ending cutscene. It's like the sun comes out and the forest regrows, and like you get like this. You either get a voiceover or like a text scroll.
You just
that
get
basically
text scroll.
says, yeah, and it basically says like the evil was rooted out and the land lived in prosperity, and it's this happy ending that coming to it as a fan of Souls and Bloodborne, there are no happy endings in those games. So like seeing a happy ending here was like, oh, interesting. Like this is like a Disney movie ending at the end of this game.
Yeah, and there is like something to sort of being jaded by that, as in like, it was subversive to give you a non-happy ending, when when you see it in, first time in like Souls or some of like, games that you see now. But like, that's why I said it felt quaint and pleasing almost to me when I first saw that, is like, for example, right? The bravest thing, in my opinion, that Elden Ring can do is have a happy ending, right? Like at the end of King's Field, the Ancient City, I see civilization, I see people on streets, and like life going on, because all that you did meant something. So it would be a subversion now for Elden Ring to have a happy ending, right?
You're right. Yeah.
So I would think it would be really brave of them to go down that route, and so let's see.
Yeah, that would be interesting, and like we can, like I said, when this episode comes out, Elden Ring will be out. People will have beaten it by the time they hear this episode, so like we may have an answer for that. I think that would be really interesting, because nothing I've seen about Elden Ring suggests that there will be anything happy happening.
Yeah.
Like at
At
all.
least I don't want there to be a cycle again or something, I guess. Because,
Yeah.
Dark Souls did it so well. I just don't want another cyclical story or whatever.
Well, like Dark Souls 3, you put an end to the cycle.
Right.
That's what Dark Souls 3 is about, is the ending of the cycle. So maybe they're leaving that behind. And you're right. It would be interesting, really interesting, if Elden Ring ended with a, I assume you're going to, I'm on Elden Ring blackout. I know nothing about like the story setup or anything like that. So I assume it's another, ruined kingdom full of monsters.
Mm-hmm.
It would be really interesting if it ends the way that Kingsfield 4 does.
Yeah. And, as long as we're on that note, Miyazaki, when he gave interviews for Elden Ring, made it a point not to say open field. I think in response to open world, in response to a question, he said, instead of calling it an open world, I think I'd like to call it an open field game or whatever. And if you play these early Kingsfield games and Kingsfield Ancient City and to an extent Dark Souls, they're all interconnected, large spaces, not technical open world in the way you think about it. And, I know that you're an Elden Ring blackout, so I'm not going to talk about stuff I saw in the network test or whatever, but it's going to be interesting just to see. I think it's just going to be interesting just to see if any Kingsfieldiness shows up in Elden Ring. So we'll see. Yeah.
Safe to assume it's going to have a moonlight sword, and safe to assume there will be a crestfallen warrior somewhere. But we'll see. Other than that, yeah. All right. Well, dude, this has been a just great conversation.
I agree.
I've had a blast talking about Kingsfield. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. As I said, I just love it so much that, it's just a great, little present to, be able to talk to someone about it for this long. This is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And there's always this kind of internal struggle when I'm thinking about what games to do on the show. I could focus on really popular games that are going to get a lot of people to download and listen to the podcast. But when I was playing Kingsfield, I was like, this game's fucking cool. And I want to share with people a game that maybe a lot of people haven't heard of, or even if you're really into FromSoft, maybe you've heard of it, but you're like, I don't know if I want to play that. So I'm happy to take the time to talk about this game because I think it's really cool, and I'm really glad that I got somebody else who feels the same way as I do, maybe even more strongly than I do, to come on the show and chat. So again, this has been great. Mystic, thanks for coming on, dude.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And again, if you want to support Tales from the Backlog, the best thing to do is tell people about it. And, ratings if you can, subscribe, and get on social media. Mystic has given me a big list of very cool resources, guides, YouTube videos about Kingsfield 4, so those will all be in the episode description as well. So, again, thanks for listening, everybody. See you next time when we see the next game that comes out of the backlog.